report any issues with the poll watchers who are there. I think the poll watchers are serving a valuable part of the process. The poll watchers here are observing to make sure that they understand the process that we're going through, and they're documenting the process to ensure that we're doing the process as we've indicated we're doing the process. And I believe, as I'm seeing the process, that those poll watchers are going to report that we followed our processes and procedures.
All right,
The voters that are frustrated, I mean, a lot of people are just saying they have to wait hours. One person called it an American that we talked to and said this is happening. A lot of people are just really upset, even though it was a relatively small number of votes. Just speak to them directly.
So to our voters who were inconvenienced, I spoke to a voter at Baker Ripley. He was in line at 6:45. He came back and voted at 11:50. And he said it was my responsibility to make sure that I was able to cast my ballot. I said to him, it's my responsibility to make sure that you can cast your ballot accurately and that your ballot will be counted. And so the court has assessed and has supported our efforts to ensure that a voter gets to count their ballot properly by extending the polling places for 1 hour. We did not object to that, stood that. The folks that brought the action, we spoke to them and said, we understand that. We're not objecting. We want every voter to cast a ballot. We want every voter to cast a ballot accurately, and we want to count every voter's ballot. So I say to our voters, know that what occurred today is nothing nefarious. What occurred today were some mistakes that were perhaps made by our judges. Judges are our friends. Judges are our neighbors. Judges arise at 4:30 a.m. in the morning to take on this task that we charge them to do. Sometimes machines don't work properly. We're going to talk to our vendor about what we're seeing with these machines. We're going to look at our processes and procedures, and where there's room for change, we will make change. And so I assure the voters, they should not be disconcerted. They should not determined to turn away from the democratic process. It's what we have, and it's a good system, and the country is in a good place.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's all we got right now, but we'll be back.
Do you know when you'll be back down here with
All right, we've been listening to Cliff Tatum, the elections administrator, talking about the reasons why the election hours have been extended to 8 o'clock today after a group filed a motion in court to have it extended because some places were not open in time at 7 a.m.
He also mentioned some locations running out of paper for ballots. He said the demand was beyond what was expected and that problem would be resolved, saying, quote, what occurred today was nothing nefarious. These are mistakes. And he assured voters that they would get to vote if they were in line. Yeah, so if you're just tuning in, the big story of the night so far is that you've got an extra hour to vote to 8 o'clock this afternoon. I mean, 8 o'clock tonight, I should say. And a bunch of polling places today actually experienced issues. 21 of 44 machines down at NRG Arena. That's where we just saw Clifford Tatum, who is the Harris County elections administrator. We talked about issues at Baker Ripley this morning on Navigation Boulevard. They were actually slow to open because they didn't have proper election supplies dropped off, including the key to open voting machines. Voters at Tracy G. Community Center were sent away to vote elsewhere because of machine problems there. Again, so we see these issues every election, and the elections administrator, again, assuring voters that this is just what happens. This is such a large operation. Again, nothing nefarious, he's saying, and that voters will be able to vote. These are just mistakes that happen and that occur on election day, as we've seen in the past.
And Cliff Tatum is new to the job as the elections administrator here in Harris County, doing what he can to reassure voters that what happened is, maybe sometimes machines don't work.
Yeah,
sometimes
absolutely.
They don't work.
We're going to go now to Adam Bennett, who is at NRG, who was listening in to that press conference with the elections administrator. Adam, what else have you learned?
Well, so we just wrapped up that press conference maybe a minute ago, and the elections administrator confirmed that all polling locations in Harris County will be open until 8 o'clock because of that court order that was issued. He says they're not trying to fight it. They recognize that there were issues at a number of polling locations today. And Cliff Tatum, the elections administrator, says they believe in the democratic process. They believe in voters getting to vote, and they want to give as many people the opportunity as possible. He also said that as far as some of the issues that have popped up today, he says they're going to be taking a hard look at it to determine what exactly they could have done better and how to fix things going forward. At last check, he said there were about 12 to 17 voting locations that had requested more paper. You remember, of course, they record the ballots not only on the electronic cards, but also with that paper ballot backup. He said they've been working down the list. At last check, they'd gotten to about 5 of them with more paper, and that they will be working to get that to them throughout the night as quickly as possible. But because the polls are open until 8 now, he said anybody in line by 7 will vote on the traditional ballot. Anybody in line after 7 will vote by provisional ballot. Those will be counted a little bit different ways, but they will be counted throughout the night. He also said because of that hour-long delay, that extra hour rather, that the polls are going to be open, that means that it will take longer to release election results. So typically at 7 o'clock when the polls usually close, we get the early voting results, and we also get the results from all the mail-in ballots that have come in so far. Well, now that's being pushed back an hour as well to 8 o'clock, and then that's really when the count will start for those election day votes. So bottom line, it's going to be into the night, definitely tomorrow early morning. He says at the earliest that we get these results. They're hoping again, by 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, somewhere in that time frame to get all of this done. But the fact that the polls are open later is going to delay things even further. Of course, this is a story we'll keep following. We'll continue to get as much information as we can. For now, we'll send it back to you.
Yeah, it's going to be a long election night. Adam Bennett will check in with you a little later on. Thank you so much.
Yeah, let's get some insight now into what is happening today and what has happened. Chris Feldman is a KHOU election law analyst. Chris, thanks for joining us this evening. What do you make of what has happened tonight?
Well, thank you for having me. And this is standard. There's nothing really exceptional here in what's happened this evening. These types of orders are often entered by district courts, especially in urban counties, where you have the population is so high and you have so much machinery of the elections going on. This is not unexpected is the way I would look at it.
Chris, what is the protocol when something like this happens? We know that a TRO was filed, a judge signed off on this, but when does this typically happen? How late into election day do you see someone filing this TRO and saying, hey, we need to keep the polls open a little later?
It often ends up being towards the end of the day because the full ramification of any issue that may have occurred earlier is not fully absorbed and appreciated. And then you have to, that takes a little time. You're addressing that fire, right? You're trying to solve the problem. And then it takes time to get an attorney involved to actually draft a proper application for a TRO. So it typically does happen at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. And obviously we live in times when many people question the authenticity of elections. Do you feel like this might feed into those fears that some people might have?
Unfortunately, because of all of the misinformation, I think any error whatsoever will be used to contribute to a misperception. But I assure everyone, and I do this professionally. I'm quite knowledgeable about how elections work. This is standard. There's nothing exceptional about this whatsoever. And the way any issues that have been handled in terms of the technical difficulties experienced with certain parts of the apparatus are, going to happen from time to time and are being addressed properly in the proper way.
And can you explain to people who might be heading out right now at 7 o'clock to try to beat the 8 o'clock deadline, how the provisional ballot works?
Sure. So provisional ballots are cast when there's a question about eligibility, meaning it's unclear whether that ballot should count or not. But this allows people at least to go and cast a ballot between 7 and 8 p.m. And it's held until the ultimate issue about whether or not it will be counted is addressed by the ballot board. So this is standard how it normally works. And there's nothing, anybody that wants to vote, needs to vote, get out. You can still go cast your vote is what I'm getting at. You can still go cast your ballot.
Yeah, and the process is still the same. You still go into the voting machine and you still click on everything digitally and then print it out.
Correct. It's the exact same. There's no alteration to the mechanism of voting whatsoever. No, not at all.
Do you think this has to do with the new system or just everyday issues that you have on any given election day?
You're going to have logistical issues in a large county, period, because of just all the parts of the bureaucracy and apparatus and people coordinating things and then getting everything set up. There's going to be those normal issues. But I do think that the first time you use a system like this, it's going to create even more points or pinch points where there's going to be something that doesn't work exactly right.
Okay, so let me ask you what happens next. Say you vote at 7:30 today. Is that vote still in jeopardy down the road with any kind of legal battles?
Sure, that ballot can be challenged. It's going to be called a provisional ballot, and it's a ballot that's allowed to be cast by federal law whenever there's a question about that voter's eligibility. And what the judge is basically saying today is that, look, go cast your vote. We're going to address ultimately when it's counted down the road. Go cast your vote. Everybody get out there and cast it, and then we will deal with how they're counted later, or whether or not that vote will be counted later.
So there is a chance that anyone who got a provisional ballot between 7 p.m. and 8 p.m., that their vote may not count down the road if a judge makes a different decision.
Sure, it can be challenged it can eventually be challenged in a court, or it can also be addressed by the ballot board, or both. So, well, first it's the ballot board, and then if somebody wanted to take it further, it would be involved in an election challenge. But the odds of that are slim to none. I'm confident that these votes will be counted in this process. So everybody needs to just get out and go vote. Those provisional ballots, I'm confident, will ultimately be counted.
Well, we do live in an age of votes being challenged, to be sure.
There's no question about it. We do live in an age where that happens, and this is a unique spin on what is normally. This is our first post-conspiracy election denial theory or conspiracy, and we're going to see it handled differently by certain people, and that's why it's just so important to stress to everyone that everything that's happening right now is not unexpected, is normal, and anyone that wants to still go vote needs to go vote because I'm confident, based on past cases, that those ballots will be counted. Absolutely confident.
Important message there. Chris Feldman, election law analyst, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. We want to go back out now to NRG Arena, where Cheryl Mercedes is also following all of this. Cheryl, tell us a little bit more about what you learned about polls staying open for an extra hour.
Yeah, so what we've been telling folks is exactly what the elections administrator came out and told us about a few minutes ago, confirming that the polls would be open until 8 o'clock. Again, if you're in line by 7, your votes will be counted as they normally are. But if you're in line after 7 o'clock, you will vote a provisional ballot. And so there are some differences there, but the administrator is saying that he's confident all of these votes will be counted, and as well as tonight, his workers are here to work late into the night to make sure everyone's vote is counted. And he did mention that while there were a lot of issues, he mentioned that it's really not a lot if you look at it, where 750 voting locations had no issues. He's reiterated here, it's nothing nefarious, it's just there were some issues that they will have to work through, right? But as we mentioned, there are elections monitors and inspectors across the area who are watching issues like this and will fill out reports and report back to the state later to see if anything else needs to be done or will happen as a result. According to this application that was filed and approved by a judge, just about an hour ago. We do know that there were some issues at least 9 polling locations. They were listed in that application along with some affidavits and complaints from folks and some poll monitors stating that some areas were experiencing delays because they couldn't find a key or a machine was down. You've heard now that 12 to 17 locations complained they were running low on paper. The elections administrator just saying that, hey, we can confirm that we have replenished paper at 5 of the locations. So we're still talking about 12 more that we're looking at. So there are a number of issues that have come up, and we can tell you that it appears that, it's still early in the evening and there could be more, but that's why we're here keeping a watch out for you guys to let you know what we're hearing coming in. Again, we're expecting to hear from the elections folks here at NRG every hour, top of the hour, with any updates. So as we know right now, the latest is polls open across the county until 8 o'clock tonight. So if you get there by 7, count it as usual. After 7, provisional ballot. Reporting live for NRG. Whatever we find out from here in the next hour or so, we'll let you know. I'm going to continue reading through these affidavits and see what else people are mentioning that they're seeing in the polls in our area.
All right, thank you so much, Cheryl Mercedes. Every election night has twists and turns, and this one has definitely started with one. Thank you so much.
And we're following all of this from our KHOU Election Central in our newsroom here. Grace White now. We understand the first state results are in, Grace.
Waco, we are starting to see results come in. The early vote in some counties starting to post here. Tarrant, a county that we're watching here right now, 51% of the vote going to Governor Abbott, 48% going to Beto O'Rourke. I'm joined with KHOU 11 political analyst Bob Stein. What stands out to you about Tarrant specifically?
I would have thought if you had any chance for seeing a Beto victory here, matching what he did in 2018, he would need a lead. You need a lead and a lead by more than just 2 or 3 points. And I think this gives you an idea of what's going to happen tonight. You go back to 2018, Beto did surprisingly well in Tarrant, Collin, Denton counties, and of course Dallas. These numbers are not what I want. You're looking at Texas overall. These are the early votes. They're from the big metroplexes, the big urban areas where you think Beto is going to do well. Yeah, these are the kinds of numbers you'd want to see, but I don't think it's going to hold up. And I think particularly when we start getting into the southern part of Texas, into the valley, into areas where I think Republicans are going to make big headway with Hispanic voters.
And let's talk about the border counties. That's another grouping of counties you'll be watching closely throughout the night. Why do those matter?
Well, I mean, the governor's in Hidalgo County tonight. We have 3 congressional races in the southern part of the state, and all have Hispanic women running against traditional, long-term, Mr. Cuellar, Congressman Cuellar, candidates, Mr. Gonzalez. I think what you're seeing is really a new generation of Republican Hispanics making a real move. And whether they win or whether the governor, for instance, takes Hidalgo County or not, these are counties that were solidly blue counties as recently as 2020, and of course, going back into 2016. Trump made some big in what I would call gains, but this is 2018, and this was where Beto came as close as any Democrat in 25 years, knocking off a statewide candidate, Senator Cruz. He's going to have to match this and do something, and my sense is we're not going to see that happen.
Yeah, and I pulled the map up from 2018 just to give everybody some context here. You can see how strong Beto O'Rourke did in 2018 along the border. That's what Bob says we'll be watching Ron and Reka throughout the night.
Interesting stuff already this evening. All right, thank you so much, Grace. Thank you so much, Bob Stein.
Of course, this election has been all over social media. We've seen political ads. We've seen people vouch for candidates.
Thank you, Adam.
We're going to go now to Brandy Smith. She's actually in our main newsroom downstairs with a look at social listening.
Okay, I'm going to share the contact.
Hey guys, even though we have this incredible team of reporters all over the Houston area, we can't be at every polling location, right? Which is why social media is such an incredibly valuable tool. You guys used Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok to tell us about the issues you faced and to share the stories of others who ran into trouble at the polls.
I met a young person in line, his first time voting. Couldn't vote though, because the machines are broken.
Johnson, that's Loren Johnson. In a TikTok video she shared, you can hear her frustration and emotion after she waited for hours to vote at Sunnyside Multi-Service Center, only to be told the machines weren't working and she needed to go somewhere else. She did, but machines weren't working there either, so Johnson went back.
Sunnyside Multi-Service Center, machines are up. It only took me 4 hours and 30 minutes. I was going there to simply say, what is happening to those that were there experiencing this? And those machines had come back up while I was gone. So I was able to vote at 9:25-ish.
By then, her TikToks had gone viral. At last check, they added up to more than 500,000 views.
Well, I hope it made them, it reminded them to go back and vote or go vote, or I'm going to go vote because that wasn't right. So hopefully people voted. I hope.
KHOU 11 learned the precinct judge closed the polling machines at Sunnyside Multi-Service Center rather than opening them up this morning. So that's what took so long to fix. One of the other things that Johnson mentioned is that she's a veteran. She served for 20 years in the military. And one of the reasons that she wanted to serve was because of democracy, because of our ability to vote. And so this morning, when she ran into obstacle after obstacle, that's what elicited so much emotion from her. And seeing generations impacted, folks older than her, folks younger than her, Ron and Reka, that was what really unsettled her this morning. She knew she'd find the time, but she wasn't sure that everyone she interacted with in the line there would.
Well, it is heartbreaking to think that people were trying to vote and weren't able to. That is heartbreaking. All right, thank you so much, Brandy Smith. Beto O'Rourke spent part of his day in the Houston area before heading to El Paso, where he will watch the election results tonight and into the morning. Our Gerald Harris is in El Paso following the Democratic hopeful. Gerald.
Good evening. Speaking with the Beto O'Rourke's campaign, there's a lot of positive energy around where things stand right now. Take a look around me. This is where Beto O'Rourke is hoping to make his victory speech. The stakes are absolutely high for this race for governor as Beto O'Rourke looks to capture the governor's office from Greg Abbott. And as you mentioned, O'Rourke tried to hammer out the Democratic vote in some of those major cities, including Houston, San Antonio, and Dallas, to move voters to the polls. Now, Beto O'Rourke is looking to become the first Democrat in more than 25 years to win the Texas governor's office. And being on the road with Beto O'Rourke, he has traveled a lot of parts of this state, probably more so than any governor candidate has in a long time. He's hoping to use that travel time to cut down on the margins where Governor Abbott may win outright, but he's looking to bring those numbers down. Again, there's still a lot of positive energy around this campaign and where things stand. Polls just closed. It's going to be a long night, but they're prepared to do it. In El Paso, Gerald Harris. Let me send it back to you, Ron and Reka.
All right, thank you so much, Gerald Harris in El Paso, where the polls have closed, but here in Harris County, again, they're open till 8 o'clock tonight.
8 o'clock tonight. We're going to go now to Marcelino Benito. He is in McAllen with Governor Greg Abbott's campaign. Let's check in with him. Marcelino.
Well, Reka, doors open just here at Governor Abbott's watch party. Supporters starting to trickle in for a long night ahead. I can tell you the Abbott campaign has been pretty optimistic and really confident for most of the day. You get a sense of that really by the candidate's schedule on the final day of campaigning. Today, Governor Abbott didn't have much on his schedule at all. He was laying low. The only event on his public schedule is appearing here to rally supporters and hopefully deliver a victory speech on that stage set up behind me. We should note, we've been noting since we got here to South Texas earlier this week, we have to note where the governor will be speaking tonight. He's speaking in McAllen. He wants to celebrate with supporters here, and that is very significant because 4 years ago he spent election night up in Austin with supporters. This time he's making a marked, pointed effort to rally Hispanic voters to the GOP. We're going to have to watch very carefully the results come in from Hidalgo County, as Grace and Bob Stein were mentioning in studio. What happens here among Hispanic voters if they filter over and trickle over to Governor Abbott's side? Just pulling a little bit of those voters, Hispanic voters, away from Democrat Beto O'Rourke can make a huge difference in this election. We do expect the governor to take the stage here around 10:02. Again, his team expecting that to be a victory speech, but of course we have to count the votes and watch those results continue to come in throughout the night. Guys.
And Marcelino, can you explain to some viewers here in Houston, if you will, just how important those votes down there in the valley are and those congressional races are down there? Perhaps that's why the governor is down there to have his watch party tonight.
Well, just to give you an idea of how important this area is, Ron, yesterday we were interviewing folks over at the Hidalgo County GOP. We had to interview in a different room because the RNC, Republican National Committee, had taken over their headquarters. It's going to be sort of a war room tonight where they're keeping a close eye on those 3 congressional races that you discussed, 3 Hispanic women running in those races, Republican women, and there's a good chance that they may unseat and take over those seats for Republicans. So a lot of eyes nationally on those races. It's why I believe also the governor, the campaign's made clear they wanted to be here in McAllen tonight. He opened up his re-election bid actually down here in McAllen last January, so it's only fitting that he's back here tonight with supporters. You, Ron, know as well that he's made immigration and border security one of the top issues in his campaign. Poll after poll that we have done throughout this election, this campaign, have shown us that voters really mobilize on both sides of the aisle to immigration and border security issues. I should mention, though, we did spend some time here on the ground earlier this afternoon talking to actual voters who were casting their ballots today here in the Valley, and not one of those voters that we talked to today said immigration and border security was the top issue for them. I thought that was striking. But again, Governor Abbott hoping that those 2 issues deliver a good chunk of voters here in the Valley and really across Texas to get them across the finish line against Beto O'Rourke.
Yeah, and it shows you the importance of the Latino vote to both parties as well. All right, thank you so much, Marcelina Benito, down live in the Valley. Well, some voters in Kingwood are getting turned away and told to go elsewhere after polling locations ran out of paper ballots.
Investigative reporter Jeremy Rogalski live at Shadow Forest Elementary with details on this. Jeremy.
Yeah, Reka and Ron, we've been out here since about 3 this afternoon, and for most of the afternoon, everything was pretty much smooth sailing. Lines were not terribly long. Voters were coming in, casting their ballots, getting out in about 15 to 20 minutes time. So everything was looking good for most of the afternoon. Then shortly before 6 o'clock, things started to go south. Election workers were meeting voters curbside, informing them that yes, they had indeed run out of ballots and giving them alternate locations. There are a couple other polling sites within about a 2 miles drive from here. But for folks who had scrambled to get off of work and make it here to do their civic duty, it certainly was frustrating. What do you make of that?
You know, I don't know. It's crazy. I was just getting off of work and trying to do my part to vote and, you know, do my thing. So, like I said, run out of time and trying to make it over there before they run us off.
That was Trey Booker, who went to one of those other locations here in Kingwood to try to cast his ballot before the 7 o'clock deadline. Election workers here tell me that they did ask Harris County Election Central for more paper ballots. They have not received them at last check. And as we heard from Administrator Clifford Tadium earlier, this is one of 17 locations that ran out of paper ballots. And that the county was able to get more paper to about 5 of those locations at last check. Again, they're still waiting here at Shadow Forest Elementary in Kingwood. Ron and Reka.
Jeremy Rogalski tracking the problems up there. Thank you so much. We want to reiterate that, again, because of issues like this that Jeremy laid out for us, these polling locations running out of paper, polls will now be open until 8 p.m. tonight. So what does that mean? That means that if you get in line after 7 o'clock, you will be given a provisional ballot. Basically, they have to look in to see whether you are actually registered to vote, and that could take even longer than to count those votes. We're taking a look at this now to sort of explain what a provisional ballot is. Again, anyone after 7 p.m. who shows up will be given that ballot because of the issues we've seen. Polling locations running out of paper, machines down at certain locations, supplies being dropped off late. So we talked to our KHOU 11 election law analyst, Chris Feldman, and he told us, look, this is basically expected. This is par for the course. These things happen, and this is not the first time we've seen something like this.
Right, and so what happened was a civil rights group filed a motion to extend the hours to 8 o'clock, and a district judge in Harris County agreed. So voters in Harris County, all over the county, have until 8 o'clock tonight. After 7 o'clock, it's a provisional ballot, which means that it could be challenged later. Mm-hmm. But if you want to vote, you're being urged to go out there and do so. The person in charge of elections, Cliff Tatum, explained that nothing nefarious had taken place. Sometimes machines don't work, and sometimes election judges, they're your neighbors. Sometimes they make mistakes. Maybe they don't show up with keys. It's a new system for so many people. Mm-hmm. And let's face it, elections in America, it's an evolving process. But that is why a judge extended it to 8 o'clock this evening. So you still have a chance to go out and vote, and if you haven't.
Yeah, trying to remedy the situation there. Let's go to Grace White now, who was in our KHOU 11 Election Central, and check in with her. Oh, looks
okay,
like
we'll be going to her in just a second.
In just a moment.
She's with Bob Steiner, political analyst, looking at some early voting results that have already come in for the metropolitan areas.
Yes, that's right.
But you get the feeling it's going to be a very long night, because extending the voting to 8 o'clock means that they'll be counting that much later into, what was already going to be a long process anyway. And you've got almost 800 polling locations in Harris County, and there's 2 machines that will be counting those. Harris County wanting to make sure they're accurate rather than fast in this whole process.
And then we talked to our election law expert, who said that, okay, so the polls are going to be open till 8 o'clock, but down the line, a judge could decide that those votes don't count. So all of this remains to be seen. But right now, if you want to vote, you can get in line. It is 7:22 right now. The polls are still open. If you get in line right now, you will get a provisional ballot, and you will be able to cast your ballot, and you will be able to vote. But of course, there are a lot of legal intricacies involved, and so we'll just have to see how all of this plays out.
Obviously, yes, and we're watching the candidates all over the state, and we're going to be watching for the results come in. But times have changed. Back in the old days, election night, you would find out.
Yes. Yeah, and it's later and later now.
But the new normal is that it could be days from now in some of these key races where you find out who is the winner and who is the loser. But
Absolutely.
That's perhaps the new normal.
Okay, it looks like Grace White is ready now with an update. Let's go to Grace.
Ron Rako, we are starting to see more results trickle in from across the state, starting to see more counties pop up on our big Texas map. I'm joined with KHOU 11 political analyst Bob Stein. Bob, what are you watching here?
I think we're seeing the same thing we're seeing with the governor's race. In fact, what you're going to begin to see tonight is that all the top of the ticket candidates, Democrat and Republican, are going to run very much alike. Why? People aren't voting for candidates, they're voting party. What I find interesting here is that if you go back to 2018, when Beto O'Rourke came within a hair of beating Senator Cruz, that's the benchmark for a Democrat if you're going to run in the last 25 years. Came within 3 points. We saw that he was doing extremely well in the Valley. He was doing well, of course, in the big metroplexes. I'll note here Collin and Denton counties. Those were counties that did go red, but they were more pinkish. They were small margins. If we go now to the 2022 election numbers for governor, you're seeing basically a deeper red in Denton, slightly pink, but look at Tarrant. Tarrant was a county that Beto did well in 2018. Now he's losing it. So if this is an indication of how the rest of the night's going to go, I know there are 254 counties in the state, but the ones that really matter are ones we're looking on this map. Many of them have less than 5,000 voters. It doesn't look like a likely repeat of 2018, which was a close one. I think the governor, Abbott, and the rest of the Republican ticket wins easily.
And let's look at the rest of the ticket. Here's a look at the early results we're starting to see come in for Lieutenant Governor. We see a few counties there, and then let's take a look at Attorney General. The race there, also seeing.
What's interesting here, and again, this is just early vote from the big metroplexes, but what's interesting here is the governor's running 57. But look at Paxton. If we go back and we look at Dan Patrick, Lieutenant Governor, 51. Paxton's probably the weakest candidate on the ticket. Twice indicted, still waiting to go to trial. Lieutenant Governor Patrick actually had some Republicans endorse his opponent. These are not enormously popular Republicans, but you can begin to see the margins here are about the same. But there'll be a 5 or 6 point drop off, I think, for people like Sid Miller, our ag commissioner. We'll see also Paxton and probably Dan Patrick run behind the governor.
Okay, and Bob, let's take a look at the national races. We're watching that balance of power nationally. If we have a few minutes, let's talk about the races you're watching here on a national level.
On the East Coast, we're going to look at North Carolina, which is a seat that I think at this point is too early to call. These are just 5%. But the incumbent, the Republican, this is an open seat. Beasley is a hope, a pickup. I think the other race that's really important here is Georgia. That's Warnock and Walker. That clearly is a race that was a cliffhanger in the polling. We're seeing 9%, but that's probably coming in from the big areas like Fulton and Gwinnett counties. We'll want to see what happens in the late nights.
And this has been a race, Bob, that's gotten a lot of attention nationally. Warnock is the incumbent.
Yeah, he's filling an unexpired term. An unexpired term of another senator, and in 2020, that race went to a runoff. See the third party here. Georgia's the only state where you have to win a majority. All the other states elect their senators with a plurality, whoever gets the larger. If Mr. Oliver does well and denies either Warnock or Walker 50% plus one vote, we're back to a January runoff, just like we were in 2020.
Interesting. You were also watching Arizona closely.
Yeah,
We're still waiting on early results there.
Arizona's another one, but it's again going to be a long night there on the East Coast. I think New Hampshire's the only other one that I'm looking for. New Hampshire.
New Hampshire. We had it earlier. New Hampshire. There we are.
New Hampshire between Hassan and this is a real classic Trump versus the Democratic base. It's still early. 13% is actually a good number. People thought this would be much closer. We'll see. She's the incumbent. He's a challenger, former military, heavily endorsed by Donald Trump, a big election denier of Biden's election. This comes what I call emblematic of the Trump campaign. Too early to call it, but again, it's an important race for the Democrats.
Another interesting one to watch. And if we have time, let's go to Pennsylvania. I think we are starting to see some results there in Pennsylvania. Another competitive race.
Yeah, that's much closer. I wouldn't make too much of the 83-15. Those are probably some returns from mail-in ballots and more likely urban areas like Philadelphia on the east.
Fetterman is the lieutenant governor.
He's the lieutenant governor who sadly suffered a stroke, which became an issue for not so much Oz, but for a lot of other voters. Of course, Dr. Oz is a famous TV celebrity. Oprah made him famous, and he's heavily endorsed in the primary by Donald Trump. He's another Donald Trump candidate, much like what you see in places like Georgia and Arizona.
And if we have time, let's talk about the House, the balance of power in the House. What races are you watching there?
Well,
especially in Texas.
There are a couple of races. Virginia will be important. Kansas. I don't think there are too many races in Texas except in the Valley.
Right.
I think you've got 3 races there. Gonzalez, De La Cruz. You've got, of course, Cuellar running. But I think the important point is this. No one doubts that the Republicans will take control of the House. The only real issue is what the margin of victory is. I'm predicting between 20 and 25 Republican pickups, with the Democrats holding a 5-seat advantage. You're going to be looking at a House that's almost as evenly divided now as it was before, except it'll be a red House. And I think that is little doubt in anybody's mind.
And Bob, the border counties that you were mentioning, that's where we see Governor Abbott here
I
tonight.
think the Republicans are looking to do something that the Democrats have feared, which is that for the last 20 years, everyone's been saying from Karl Rove and George W. Bush that Hispanics culturally and ideologically are more in line with Republicans. This blue 2018 advantage changed dramatically in 2020 when Trump started winning some of these what we call Valley or South Texas.
And this is the 2020 map from that presidential race.
And what you're beginning to see is that President Biden is not able to pull, and we're going to probably see at least one, if not 2 Republicans come very close to getting elected to the Congress from the Valley. That I have to think is a historical change.
And this is Hidalgo County from 2020. Okay. All right. Thank you, Bob Stein. We will be watching our big board all night, and we will come back to you with updates.
All right. The changing landscape of Texas. Thanks, Grace White.
Right now, we're going to go back to NRG Arena. That is where Adam Bennett is, and that is also where Cliff Tatum, the elections administrator, announced about an hour ago that polls would remain open until 8 p.m. tonight, and talked about how voters could get in line after 7 p.m. and get a provisional ballot. Let's go back out to Adam Bennett with more on this.
Yeah, so as you heard, the polling places, because of this court order, they will all stay open until 8 o'clock tonight. So what that means is that anybody who got in line after 7 o'clock, they will have to vote a provisional ballot. The officials at the polling sites know who that is because a clerk will stand at the end of the line at 7. Then anybody who lines up behind that clerk will then have to vote provisionally. So the way this will work, they will vote the same way that anybody else would, where they'll put the paper into the machine, they'll make their selections on the touch screen, and then it'll print out their finalized ballot. But the difference is, instead of putting that ballot into the scanner like everybody who voted or everybody who was in line by 7 would do, they will instead put that ballot into a separate envelope. That will then be brought here to the central counting station here at NRG Arena, just like the other votes will, except it'll be counted separately. So it also may take a little bit longer to count because there is a qualifying process just to make sure that voter is who they say they are. But by and large, we are told that those votes will be counted tonight, just like the other votes for the people that voted the traditional way who were in line by 7 o'clock. But what this is doing is it's going to delay the results, right? So typically we see the early voting results released at 7 o'clock along with the mail-in totals for whatever has been received up to that point. Well, that has now been pushed to 8 o'clock. So again, after the polls now close at 8. And then there will be a little bit longer process to start the counting of the election day vote. So first, everybody that's in line has to get through the line and vote. That could take a while because we've seen quite a few people lining up. Once that's done, it'll take the election judges about 45 minutes to an hour to close their polling sites. And then they actually have to drive those materials, the machines and the cards that have the votes on them, as well as the paper backup. They have to drive that all the way down here to this centralized location, Energy Arena. As you know, Harris County is a huge county, both population-wise, it's the third largest in the country, and then land-wise, it's massive too. It has a land area larger than the state of Rhode Island. So you're talking about judges from 782 polling locations spread all throughout the county. The longest is more than 45 minutes away with no traffic. So if there's any kind of heavy traffic or a wreck, anything like that, it's going to take even longer. Then they're brought here, and then the tabulation process begins. And on top of that, there are only 2 machines that are reading the votes for, again, what is the third most populated county in the entire country. And there have been hundreds of thousands of votes so far today. The last count I saw a couple hours ago was 263,000 votes just cast today alone. So, bottom line, it was already going to be a long night here at the Harris County Central Count, but the elections administrator told us a short time ago, get ready to stay even later. He's still hopeful that by the middle of the overnight hours, so say maybe 2 a.m., maybe even 3 a.m. at the latest, they're hoping to have these results all tabulated, at least the final unofficial results. Of course, mail ballots, some will still be coming in tomorrow. There's overseas voters, these provisional ballots that now have to be tallied up. So there are some other votes that will still be coming in, but the unofficial votes from today, 100%, they hope to have that done by the middle of tomorrow morning. But staff here, media, people that are watching these races closely, they are preparing for what is expected to be a pretty long night here at Energy Arena at the Harris County Central Counting Station. For now, we'll send it back to you.
Yeah, marathon night for sure. Adam Bennett, thank you so much. We'll check in back with you a little later.
All right, we've got a guest joining us right now. A long resume, Orlando Sanchez, founder of the Texas Latino Conservatives, longtime Republican politician, former Houston City Council member, Harris County Treasurer for 10 years.
12.
12? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. 3 terms.
Yeah.
All right, 12 years. Welcome tonight. Thanks for joining us. Well, first of all, let's talk about what are your thoughts on extending it to 8 o'clock, the voting?
Well, in the old days, before technology, we used to have election results before midnight. Now we're out of paper, wrong dates on machines. Machines are inoperable, and it just seems like there's always a set of problems in Harris County.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is. It's got the longest ballot. And it's got more polling places than anywhere else in Texas.
More than 780 polling places.
Yeah, but we've always had a lot of polling places in Harris County.
So you're saying on election night these problems are essentially inevitable, or do you feel like we've had more in the past few elections?
I think we've had more. I mean, where we have days now without election results and more machines breaking and running out of paper and wrong dates, it seems like we can't get the election process squared away. When we had an elected official running the operation, it seems to me that it was a little smoother.
Mm-hmm. The times were different back then, no doubt. Now, do you think these provisional ballots will be challenged by anybody?
No, I mean, the court has ruled that anyone that's in line by 7 and before 8 p.m. can cast a provisional ballot, so there are procedures in the election code on how to handle provisional ballots, and they'll be handled according to the code.
So you don't really see anybody from either party challenging that?
I really don't.
Mm-hmm.
We want to talk about the votes now, the voting population. You're a longtime conservative, and we have been looking at candidates who really appeal to the Hispanic population in Texas. Seen a lot of it near the border, down south. And typically, though, as we've seen in past elections, when you are in the bigger metropolitan areas, you're in the bigger cities, we see the Hispanic population voting with Democrats, but this election very much embracing the Republican Party. What are some of the issues that are appealing to these voters that are coming from Republicans?
Well, I think if you're looking along the border, obviously it's the influx of undocumented aliens. Remember, in Texas, every service, whether it's the jail, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's EMS, schools, and social services, are funded by the local property taxpayers. So along the border, people are fed up of using their property tax dollars to support undocumented aliens. And so that's why you see a big shift. On top of that, the Democrats decided to start the narrative of defunding police. That didn't set well down south, where a substantial majority of law enforcement, whether it's DPS or whether it's the local constable or the sheriff, are Hispanics. More Hispanics disproportionately joined the U.S. military. Almost 67% of Border Patrol agents are Latinos. And so when the Democrats came after law enforcement, the military, and CBP, Hispanics said, wow, you know, that's not the party we're used to.
We do have to mention, though, that and make clear that the Hispanic population, the Latin population, is not this monolith when it comes to voting. Correct. That people are very diverse in their opinions, just like any population, really. I think it's easy for people to kind of group people together and say they're Democrats, they're Republicans, but kind of explain the nuances within the community and why people vote differently.
It's a great question. I get that all the time. People say, well, what's a Hispanic? A Hispanic's the same thing as an American. I mean, we have, if you look at the Astros, we have descendants of Africa that are Hispanic. We have Asians that are descendants. Peru had an Asian president, Fujimori. We have mestizos. We have Native Americans. We have Caucasians from Spain. So the Hispanic world is just like America. And you're right, it's not monolithic. In the old days, where there was a large concentration of Mexican Americans in Texas, and in the 50s, because of civil rights, they voted with the African American community more towards the Democrats. But now, as the community becomes more diverse, as multi-generational immigrants are here, like myself, my daughter, they tend to be economically more successful, better educated, tend now to start voting more conservative, like their neighbors.
Okay, well, let's talk about Texas as a whole, because it's been long said that Texas is going to be turning blue. It doesn't, you know, do you see that, though? Because if you're going by recent polls and maybe some of what we're seeing now, what we heard Bob Stein say earlier, at least in the governor's race, it doesn't look like it's turning blue.
Not immediately. Texas has an issue, though. The populations of Texas are concentrated in urban areas, counties like Harris, Dallas, Tarrant, Bexar, Travis, El Paso. Those are the biggest counties. Those have been won by Democrats. So Republicans have lost the large urban areas. That's where the growth is. Rural Texas is saving the Republican Party, but that's not where the growth is. There are population depletions in counties like Kinney County, Texas, which is a border county, has lost population. Solidly conservative, but they're moving away. So the Republicans are going to have to do a better job if they want to stay in the majority on how to reach the Hispanic community in urban Texas.
And what do you see as the biggest races tonight? Are the obvious ones? Governor, lieutenant governor, Harris County judge?
Yeah, I think, you know, obviously governor and the top of the statewide tickets, lieutenant governor, the attorney general. I think the comptroller is going to be fine. Harris County, obviously the 800-pound gorilla in the room, is the county judge's race, where Alex Mealer, the granddaughter of Spaniards, has put up a good fight against an incumbent, Lina Hidalgo, who's an immigrant from Colombia.
Mm-hmm. And what about the vote down in South Texas? We were talking about that earlier in those 3 congressional races down there.
Very interesting. There's a possibility, somewhat remote, but there is a possibility we could see 3, what I call the triple threat. Monica de la Cruz in CD 25, I believe. Cassie Garcia and Mayra Flores, who's the first native-born Mexican ever elected to the U.S. Congress, possibly win and join Tony Gonzalez, a Republican, further west along the Rio Grande near Valverde and Kinney County and Eagle Pass, Texas. That's a remote possibility, but we will pick up an additional seat, and so we're going to have more Hispanics than we've ever had in South Texas, representing us both in the U.S. Congress and in local governments.
All right, Orlando Sanchez, thank you so much for your insight. We're going to check in with you in a little bit. It looks like we are going to go now to Election Central and check in on some polls. All right.
No, we're not. Oh.
Okay, sorry. We're going to Anieli Ruiz right now, and she's going to give us an update from the polls. Let's go to her.
Hey guys, we're at one of the polling locations here where it had a lot of issues this morning. According to people that were here, they told us they actually opened late. They opened at 7:30 this morning. And right behind me, you can kind of see people are still in line. There's a few people that just trickled in here. Of course, people are trying to take advantage that the hours have been extended. And we are at the Bissonnet Street here at Bayland Park Community Center. But earlier we were over at the Mandarin Magnet School, and they had several issues at that polling location. A lot of voters tell us they were turned away after they ran out of paper. A few of those voters were able to come back a few hours later, and the center did have some paper at that time. But a lot of people are very frustrated, saying they were being turned away, and I'm not sure how many voters actually came back to cast their ballots. Again, that's one of the several issues that we saw out here today, and one of the reasons why these hours have been extended. But of course, we'll continue to follow this and bring you guys the latest. We'll send it back to you in the studio.
Thank you so much, Anieli Ruiz. So there have been some issues out there. And again, this is why the polls are now, I got about 18 more minutes left if you want to hit the polls and vote in a provisional ballot. This was an order by a judge here in Harris County after a civil rights group filed a motion to have that those hours extended to 8 o'clock.
All right, we're going to go now to reporter Maria Aguilera, who's at the Northeast Multi-Service Center. Let's check in with her.
Yeah, Reika, well, at this center, they experienced several issues, and they experienced some of the ones that they experienced at some of the other locations as well. Now, we were told by an elections judge and also the NAACP about those issues that they had here. We were told that they ran out of paper, as did some other polling locations. And on top of that, they had issues with some of the machines either jamming or smudging when printing. Now, that resulted in some people having to start the process over, and some people also left to just go vote at another location. Now, attorneys with the NAACP took several calls, and other organization leaders also stopped by to find out what the issues were.
We deserve the right to have these machines to be done right and in order. So when I start receiving these calls, that's why I start going to the different locations so I can lay eyes on it and see. And then once I've seen exactly what was happening, then that's when I reported it to NAACP, also to our chairman, Carol Robinson, with Texas Coalition of Black Democrats. And this is why we have the extended hours.
Yeah, she said they were getting a lot of calls, but here they seem to have worked through the issues. As you can see, there's no line out here because all of the people are inside, but there is a pretty decent line inside this center. But again, all of these issues are really what resulted in that extension to 8 p.m. Guys, back to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Maria Aguilera, giving us the latest from that location. So there are some issues out there, and people are working through them, and now you have until 8 o'clock to go out and vote if you haven't done so.
Yeah, 7:44, about 15 minutes left to get in line.
And, which of course means, it's going to take us longer, take the county longer to count the votes. But we were told ahead of time. We knew for months that it was going to be a long process. They've got 800 polling locations again in the Harris County area, and 2 machines to count the votes tonight and in the coming days. But they wanted just 2 machines to have more control over the situation and to ensure that the process is done well, not speed being the main concern, but accuracy being the main concern. And everybody can be on board with that. I'm sure everybody's on board with accuracy as far as the vote is concerned.
Yeah, and a lot of our reporters are spread out across the area, and they have highlighted issues that, aren't specific to one location. We just saw Maria up on the northeast side of Houston. There were issues at Baker Ripley on navigation. We had issues at NRG Arena, Election Central there. Voters at the Tracy G Community Center were turned away because of machine problems. So we have heard a lot of issues around town, from running out of paper, issues with election machines, folks, showing up late to open the doors for people to get in to vote. So a plethora of issues across Harris County for sure. And again, all of this leading to a judge issuing that temporary restraining order saying, okay, look, we're going to keep the polling locations open for 1 more hour. If you get in line after 7 o'clock, you're going to get that provisional ballot and you still will be able to vote.
Yeah, and we're living in times right now where voting is under the microscope. So everything has to be done properly, and if people are being turned away, that's an issue that obviously we can't have, whether it's somebody not having the key to a voting machine, or machines not working, or running out of paper. So these are things that are being addressed by at least having the polls close at 8 o'clock instead of 7 o'clock.
Okay, we're going to talk about some of the hot races that folks are watching, not only locally, but around the state. Looking at the race for lieutenant governor now, this is not a joint ticket here like president, vice president. The governor and lieutenant governor can actually be from different parties. It hasn't happened since the late 1990s, but this person essentially will assume the governor's office if the governor is unable to run the state. And the two candidates here, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick seeking his third term. He was first elected in 2014. He has helped legislation that's legalized campus carry, open carry, among other things. So this is the incumbent here, who is going against, of course, Mike Collier. This is Mike Collier's second time running for this seat in 2018.
Yeah, it's a rematch. It's a
rematch.
rematch.
He lost by about 5% of the vote. So a lot of folks wondering if he has a chance. But
and
right
as you can
now,
see in this graphic, this is just a 4% reporting right now. And now we go on to the governor's race, 51% to 48%. And that again was just 4% reporting right now. It's going to be a long night and maybe a long morning as well in that next few days, and see how the numbers may or may not change. Ken Paxton in the lead there with just 4% over the challenger Rochelle Garza. That's also one of the hot races everybody's going to be watching. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, the GOP incumbent. The comptroller race, Glenn Hagar with 55% of the vote. Janet Dudding with 43% of the vote, again, with just 4% right now. The Republican in the lead. Bob Stein was saying a lot of people are voting just by party.
Yeah, absolutely. But they have to go in. We can't do the straight ticket voting anymore, right? So people are having to kind of manually select, whether Republican or Democrat, select the candidate of choice.
But still going with their party of choice. Don Buckingham with 54% of the vote, and Jay Kleberg with 44% of the vote for land commissioner.
Taking a look at the agriculture commissioner, Sid Miller, leading with 55% of the vote. Again, 4 precincts reporting. We're hoping to get more as the night goes on, but it's going to be a long night. Susan Hayes right now with 45%. All
right, let's go back to Grace White and Bob Stein. They got some more information, a closer look on what's going on in the polls and the voting today. Hey, Grace.
Reiko, we're starting to see a few more counties sprinkle in. Bob, talk about the significant ones that you think will be an indication of how things will go tonight.
Well, I mean, right now it's looking pretty much like what you would have expected from the polling data, okay? You're looking at Republican boxes with the exception of, in the Valley, of course, Harris. We see, of course, Dallas, but Collin, Denton, Tarrant counties are trending Republican. I want to go back to this number, and this is the number that now is beginning. Go back to the statewide number. We think there's between 9 and 10 million votes. Dave Carney, the campaign manager for Governor Abbott, thought 10.2 million votes. I think that's a little high. I think it's under 10, maybe close to it. But look at this. We're seeing 2.5 million votes. The spread 3 points. Now, we don't know where these votes are coming from. There's a whole vast number of these 254 counties, but most of these counties don't add up. 60% of the vote is going to come from less than 60 counties. 60, always the way I think about it. I think it's early, and this is probably the early vote, but I'm a little surprised at how close it is. We'll see at what happens later on in the evening. I still have this sense that Abbott is in a position to win, but he won by 15 points in 2018.
Yeah, let's talk about the spread.
I don't think he's going to win by double digits. I think this number is going to be considerably lower. And history tells us something else. In the last 3 presidential elections, where Republicans have won every one of those elections.
And here's the presidential from 2020, looking at the Texas map.
The margin was getting, if you go back to 2016, you'll see that the margin was almost 9-10 points. If you go to 2020, that margin gets cut by 3 or 4 points. It's about 6, I think 5.5, whatever. The important point is Democrats are doing consistently better. And it may very well be that Abbott's margins here are simply part of a trend where Republicans win, but they win by smaller margins. Right now, it's, a pretty healthy, heavy, but it's not double digit like it was in 2018, excuse me.
So 2018, just to go back to that, that was Governor Abbott versus Lupe Valdez. Many people remember that race. He won by 13 points in 2018. If you go back to 2014, when he ran against Wendy Davis, that spread was 20 points. So you see the difference there. But you and I were also talking about what you are watching tonight is turnout, the percent of registered voters that are coming to the polls, that came to the polls today to make their voices heard.
Yeah,
why is that interesting to you?
Well, what's important here, of course, is that generally the norm is a higher turnout favors Democratic candidates because Democratic voters tend to be younger, less experienced, and they are not likely to show up in these midterm elections. In 2018, we had the highest midterm election in over 40 years.
53%.
Against
registered
33% in 2014.
That's a big difference.
That's a 20-point difference. Now, if you say that it's lower in 2020, it will be. I don't think it'll be 53. It will be much higher than 33, and my guess is somewhere between 45, maybe 46, 47. That will still be an unusually high turnout when you consider normal turnouts in midterm elections, at least in this century. Does that help Democrats? We'll see. But again, these are very early results. They don't reflect election day polling, where Governor Abbott might be doing much better because of Republicans' fear of voting by mail.
And Bob, let's take a quick look, if we have some time, at the race for lieutenant governor. Again, this is early, just what we're starting to see trickle in results from across the state. Again, Patrick with 58%, Collier at 48%. And we'll also take a look at the attorney general's race closer here. Paxton 49, Garza 48. Again, early results. A lot of counties still not reporting.
There's a pattern that's beginning to show here. The governor is going to run way ahead of lieutenant governor, AG candidates, ag secretary, such as Sid Miller.
And that's something you were expecting.
And I think that, and if there's going to be an upset, it might not be at the top of the ticket, but it might be showing this closeness, if you want. If that holds up, you might see Paxton. He's the most vulnerable, I think, of the Republican statewide candidates. He's been under a lot of controversy.
A lot of controversy.
And it may be that it's not so much people are voting for Garza. What I want to see, for instance, look at that, 1.235. Now go back to the governor's race.
All right, I think we're out of time, Bob, but we'll keep watching it. Ron and Reiko, we're going to send it back to you for now.
All right, thank you so much, Grace. We got about a minute to talk to you again. Orlando Sanchez, our Republican up here. So you've been looking at some of those graphics. Anything surprise you?
Not yet. Nothing is standing out as a big surprise. It's what we had expected. The polls were pretty close. You know, they had Governor Abbott and the top of the ticket in Texas anywhere between the high single digits to sometimes the low double digits, and that's what we're seeing.
Mm-hmm. And you think this, how long do you give this, days, weeks, months to be figured out?
No, I think the statewide probably are going to be in early. I think Harris County's unfortunately going to have problems. We were the county last time they had issues, and we may repeat that again, but it'll all be resolved in a day or two.
Is that because we are the largest county? There's a lot more to do.
You know, as I said, when it was in the hands of elected officials, it was quick.
To be continued,
right.
To be continued. We're going to be here all night long. Right now we're going to send it to Len and Mia with more election coverage for you.
And welcome back, everybody. Harris County voting locations are open for another 5 minutes because of a recent court order following a lawsuit.
A big development this evening. A judge granted the extension due to late starts and other issues at different polling locations. Adam Bennett joins us now live from the Harris County election headquarters.
Yeah, Adam, what is it like at NRG right now?
Well, Lynn, normally at this time we would maybe start to see the first election judges trickling in with equipment or being very close. Instead, you can see it's still pretty quiet over here where we are. Really kind of the calm before the storm, kind of the calm before all of the election workers start showing up. But what we are seeing is off in the distance, see that black curtain over there? That's actually a polling site, and there are still a number of people going out the door still in line. Remember, because the polls are open later, if they are in line by 8 o'clock, they are still able to vote. Now, if they lined up after 7 o'clock tonight, they will have to vote provisionally. That's part of the terms of this court order that came down. Take a listen to the election administrator. We talked to him a short time ago. He explains how exactly those ballots will be cast and counted.
Voters will cast their ballot as normal, but place their paper voter record in a sealed provisional ballot envelope instead of inserting it into the scanning machine. All provisional ballots will be tabulated separately inside our central count station here at NRG.
So you heard him there. Those provisional ballots will be counted here at NRG, as will all the other election day ballots that were not cast provisionally, just cast the traditional way. But that count will take longer than normal because of that hour delay in opening the polls. So 8 o'clock, that's when we're expecting to see the early voting results released, along with the mail-in ballots up to that point. And then usually once all the voters in line have voted at each polling site, it takes judges about an hour to close down that polling location. And then they have to drive the results here to central count, depending on where they are in Harris County, which is a massive county, larger than the size of Rhode Island in terms of land. That could take a while. That could take upwards of 45 minutes. So bottom line, they expect the count to go into the early hours of tomorrow morning. It's going to be a long night here at Energy Arena. We'll send it back to you.
Delayed by an hour due to that extension that was court ordered. Thank you so much. Now, one of the problematic polling locations is the Northeast Multi-Service Center.
Yeah, it's where our Maria Aguilera joins us live with more on what's being done. And now the NAACP is getting involved.
Maria, bring us up to speed.
Mia, this multi-service center experienced several issues today, and it's not unique to this polling location. As you mentioned, several others experienced that as well. Now, we did hear from the NAACP, and we confirmed some of those issues with the elections judge. Now, we were told that earlier today they ran out of paper, as did some other polling locations. On top of that, they had issues with some of the machines either jamming or smudging when printing. Now, that resulted in some people having to start the process over. Some left to vote at other polling locations. Now, attorneys with the NAACP took several calls, and other organization leaders also stopped by to find out what the issues were.
We deserve the right to have these machines to be done right and in order. So when I start receiving these calls, that's why I start going to the different locations so I can lay eyes on it and see. And then once I've seen exactly what was happening, then that's when I reported it to NAACP, also to our chairman, Carol Robinson, with Texas Coalition of Black Democrats. And this is why we have the extended hours.
They seem to have worked through the issues here at this location, but really it was issues like that that led to the extended hours of 8 p.m. No line here, but they are inside. There's a decent amount of people inside waiting to vote. Mia, back to you.
That extended hour quickly coming to a close as we are at 7:59 right now. Thank you, Maria.
Yeah, people are not happy. Let's take a look at early vote totals for the race of Texas governor.
That's right. We are watching elections in the local and state level as well. These with early returns from across the state, about 4% reporting at this point. Greg Abbott with 52% of the vote, while looking at Democratic challenger Beto O'Rourke with 47% of the vote right now in the highly watched race for governor.
All right, let's look at the AG's numbers for tonight, shall we? For Attorney General, this is expected to be close, and early voting returns show that it is true. The incumbent, Ken Paxton, who's got some legal trouble of his own, 49%. Rochelle Garza, the civil rights attorney from the Valley, at 48%. So that's a very close race. Let's see if it holds up as more numbers come in.
There is so much more to come this evening. We're staying on top of it all. We'll see you soon.
Back here in the newsroom at 8 o'clock, I'm Reka Mudaraj with Ron Trevino as we follow things on this election night. We're checking in now on the governor's race.
Yeah, we've got reporters all over the state and all over the city.
Absolutely. We're going to go to Greg Abbott's camp first. Our Marcelino Benito is following his campaign in McAllen, Texas. Marcelino.
Really a festive mood, a lot more festive than it was when I checked in with you 30 minutes ago. You can hear the band starting to play behind me. Supporters have now trickled into this venue, hopefully to hear a victory speech from Governor Abbott later tonight. Governor Abbott has taken the lead in those early returns. Still a lot of votes to count, but the campaign tells me they're very happy with what they're seeing. They really had a sense of optimism and real confidence throughout most of this day. The governor, as we discussed earlier, had no events on election day today. He didn't campaign, he didn't call people to get out the vote. He really laid low for most of the day. The only event on his schedule is this party, this event he hopes to have with supporters later this evening. We are told the governor is already in the McAllen area, and he is set to speak here, we're told, to his supporters around 10:02. It's really been smooth sailing for the governor throughout most of this campaign. He launched it here in the city of McAllen last January, and it's been a very structured and controlled campaign. He wanted one debate, he got one debate. Coincidentally, that debate also happened here in Edinburgh in the Rio Grande Valley. It just goes to show you how important this area is. We also learned today from his campaign they wanted to stress that Governor Abbott is the only governor in Texas history, the one who's come to the valley the most out of any other elected governor. It is critical for him to do well here, and if he does win re-election, if he does win that third term, they'll be watching very closely what the turnout was like here and how he did with those Hispanic voters. I can tell you by looking around at his supporters here, there are a lot of Hispanic folks here, Hispanic women in particular. Those will be key to building his coalition to see if he can pull off this victory, and something the GOP will be watching very closely to see if they can repeat nationally. We discussed earlier, they'll be watching those 3 congressional races as well. So all eyes really on Texas, but in particular on South Texas and what GOP can do with those Hispanics throughout this evening. Guys, back to you.
Yeah, Marcelino giving us the big story again that we've been talking about down in the valley. A lot of Democratic seats could go to Republicans for the first time in years. Greg Abbott visiting that area more than any other governor, according to folks down there.
We have to go right now to Alexandra Mealer, who's challenging the Harris County judge. Let's listen to her.
Always disappointing that there's trouble, but glad. I mean, they had almost 800 election sites, 2 weeks of voting. So I think what everyone can feel good about is that everyone who wanted to vote had the opportunity, and very much believe that, that should always be the case.
Talk about how tight this race is.
Yeah.
I know earlier today you guys were saying how cautiously optimistic you are at this moment as those results are going to begin rolling in. Are you hopeful that tonight perhaps you will take that?
No, absolutely. So always did this race with the expectation of being able to win. Knew I had a message that would resonate, and I think we're seeing that so far. And then as votes come in, I think you'll see our position strengthen. But obviously incredibly close. Everyone knew it was a very tough race, and the results today reflect that.
What does it say about you as a candidate, about your opponent, that it's so close? What do you think about that?
No, I think that reflects a lot, obviously, on the record of my opponent, as well as what we are running on, getting back to this kind of message of good governance and really putting a plan in place to restore our criminal justice system. And you can see clearly that message resonated with how tight these judicial races are. It was a few years ago where we lost all of our judicial benches. And right now, it's very exciting to see that we have a lot of Republican judges that are actually even up in their races. So people are looking beyond party lines and looking to the person. And that's the way local politics really should be. Well, hopefully I'll be able to go to the park with my kids and we'll know how things settle one way or the other, but just looking forward for the race to be done and for everyone to know kind of which direction our county is going to head in. Actually, just how much can relate to other skills. So a lot of people familiar, military background. I think what you can see is that I do have a very operational background, just running a non-traditional campaign. We pushed out over 30,000 yard signs in a couple months. Did that by really developing this strong grassroots network. Had a lot of fun experimenting even with different types of signs. Came out in a fire truck today. Somebody rented an airplane, so we certainly managed to tap into that enthusiasm. But we didn't do just one thing, really tried to figure out how to reach as many people as quickly as possible.
And as polls close, what do you want people in the
All right, you've been hearing from Alex Mealer running for the Harris County judge seat, speaking confidently from Kirby Ice House to reporters and supporters there, saying that she ran what she called a non-traditional campaign, and she was confident with the legwork and the groundwork she had done there and the grassroots campaign that she had. She also mentioned, and we had showed this in our earlier shows, her coming in on a fire truck, I believe, at the West Gray Center to cast her vote today.
Yeah, and we also have to tell you, she was also talking about extending the voting to 8 o'clock. It's 8:05 now, so the polls are closed in Harris County. It appeared like she was addressing that early on in this news conference, talking about, well, you know, it's good to ensure that everybody has a chance to vote. And but the chance is now over because it's 8:06 now. The polls are closed in Harris County. All right, so let's move on now. We heard from Marcelino Benito with the governor's watch party going down in the valley. Let's go to El Paso now. The challenger, Beto O'Rourke, is having his watch party out there tonight, and that's where we have Gerald Harris. Gerald, what's the scene out there in El Paso tonight?
Hey, Ron, people are beginning to fill up the party here in El Paso where Beto O'Rourke is hoping to have a victory speech. I spoke with some campaign staffers. They told me there's still a lot of positive energy. The reason why, there's still a lot of votes out there. In particular, there's still a lot of votes out there in the cities in those suburban areas like Fort Bend, Harris County, in the Dallas area. He's still trying to run up those margins of victory in those particular counties, but his focus in this race has been to contact as many people as he possibly could in red areas, blue areas, old, young, and in between, with the particular focus on Latino voters, African American voters, young and college age voters. Again, still a lot out there to be excited for if you're a part of the Beto O'Rourke campaign and you're watching these returns come in, but those votes are going to start to come in, and this race is going to start to define itself. Whether or not Beto O'Rourke has done enough to secure victory, again, that remains to be seen. But supporters are trickling in. There's still a lot of positive energy, and they're hoping they can secure victory, at least in the early morning hours when we know the full results. Ron?
All right, Gerald Harris, live in El Paso with the Beto O'Rourke campaign. It's going to be a long night and morning for a lot of candidates throughout the state, for sure, and probably all over the country.
Absolutely. You know, we've been hearing from several polling places where they have run out of paper, and that has been one of the issues during this election. And one of those places is in Kingwood. That's where Jeremy Rogalski is with more there. Anything resolved up there, Jeremy?
Well, Ron and Reka, that is the question of the night at so many locations. How can you run out of paper? How can that be? Here at Shadow Forest Elementary in Kingwood, we have some context. One of the election workers told me, hey, listen, we thought we had enough. Based on past elections, based on historical data, we thought we had enough paper. But because, at least at this polling location, there was high turnout, as the afternoon rolled on, they began to see they were going to run out, or they were getting low. So I'm told they called Harris County Election Central saying, hey, we're going low, we need more paper, and they put out the call for that. Well, at about 6 o'clock, that's when they ran out, and that's when they came and greeted voters curbside saying, folks, I'm sorry, you got to go to another polling location, and they would give them directions for that. So they thought they had enough, and they asked for more, but that additional paper never came here. Even after the polls were extended an hour to 8 o'clock, still didn't arrive here. So that is the scene here in Kingwood at Shadow Forest Elementary. So what happens now? Well, as you can see, there's a Harris County Sheriff's deputy right there. This is one of 80 polling locations where a law enforcement officer is handling the duties of transporting the equipment and the ballots and those digital drives that store the ballots. There are 782 locations. About 80 of those, law enforcement is handling those duties. This is one of the farthest locations from NRG Arena, from that election central counting center at NRG. It's 36 miles away. So what we're going to do throughout this evening is we're going to follow this deputy and track his progress to see, hey, how long does it take? That's one of the big challenges, is the sheer size of Harris County. You're talking nearly 1,800 square miles. Every single polling location must be driven to NRG because Texas law forbids returns from being transmitted electronically. So we're waiting. We're told in the next 10-15 minutes the presiding judge is going to shut down the equipment, fill out the necessary paperwork. All that stuff will be loaded into the Sheriff's Department SUV. We're going to hit the road with that deputy, and we'll check back with you on his progress in a little bit, Ron O'Rourke.
So, Jeremy Rogalski, you are at one of the 17 locations that ran out of paper. You said that the problem was never resolved. When you saw folks being turned away, essentially, did you speak with them? What were they saying about that? That must have been frustrating.
It absolutely was. We talked to a couple of folks who came here. They scrambled to, get off of work and rushed over here because they knew they only had an hour. They didn't know how long the lines were going to be. They get here and they're turned away and turned around and told to go elsewhere. Fortunately, there is another polling location within a couple of miles drive, but they certainly were frustrated. They come here to do their part like they do every election cycle, and there's no paper. And, using their words, how can you run out of paper? So some insight here. It'll be interesting to see, was Harris County prepared? What kind of research do they do in terms of stocking sufficient supplies? And what kind of pad, if you will? If you know there's going to be so many people at a poll historically, do you increase the amount of paper by 10% or 20%? Certainly a lot of questions to be asked in the Monday morning quarterback phase of all this. But again, first things first, all these ballots from here and the 781 polling locations must be driven to Election Central count at NRG.
Yeah, some frustrations. They're not just on the part of the voters, but also the election officials who put out the call for more paper and never got it. All right, thank you so much, Jeremy Rogowski, live in Kingwood. We'll be talking to you throughout the evening. We also have to tell you that the election administrator is going to be having a news conference addressing reporters here in a few minutes. So wait up for that. We understand Mia has something for us down in the studio as well. Mia Gradney. Hey, Mia.
Hello there and good evening to you both. Now that the polls are officially closed and we are past that extended hour of 8 o'clock, we're going to start to see some of the early results come back. And those early results are really from early voting as well as mail-in ballots. That tabulating has been in the process since before the polls closed. And with thinking about early voting and what those numbers could look like, we want to look at early voter turnout for this election season in 2022 and compare it to the last midterm election back in 2018. Looking at our bar graph here, you can see that 2018 is represented in the green, 2022 in the red. Do you see a trend here? 2018, the voter turnout was higher for the majority of the early voting time period. That's until this year in 2022, when you get to the last 3 days of early voting, you'll see in the red that early voting surpassed early voting in 2018. What will all of that mean? What will it boil down to? Well, we'll have to wait and see once we get more of those results and returns, which we should be seeing soon, since these are votes, once again, that are tabulated and allowed to be tabulated here in Harris County prior to polling locations closing. Wanted to give you an overview of what early voting looked like in Harris County. Now let's send it back over to you, Ron and Reka.
It's interesting stuff, Mia. I mean, the unpredictability of voter turnout, it seems like we have that every few years. All right, thank you so much, Mia.
And both parties obviously pushing early voting to kind of really shore up those votes. Like we said, we're running into issues today on Election Day. Folks hoping to vote today. They want to ensure that people can vote and get their vote in for who they want and the candidates they want in office. Speaking of which, we're going to go now to Grace White. She is with Bob Stein, our KHOU 11 political analyst, with more on those votes that are coming in. Grace.
We're looking now at the national races, the House here in South Texas. Bob, this is what you said you were going to be watching throughout the night. These counties here, we're kind of calling them a sandwich here. 1, 2, 3, very competitive races. What are we seeing down here?
I think we're seeing what we pretty much expected. Henry Cuellar, who was a very conservative Democrat and barely got through his own primary, is winning pretty handily against what is a first-time Hispanic woman running against on the Republican ticket. In the other race, we saw Gonzalez, who also was an incumbent congressman who switched districts after the Republicans redrew.
Because of the redistricting.
Because of redistricting, he moved out of an old district that had not been drawn and is in a more favorably Democratic district. He also is winning by about.
And we're seeing that play out here. That's the far right county on the border.
But this one right here has Vallejo against Dela Cruz. And that's a much closer race. Dela Cruz got herself a district that was clearly better for Republicans. Looks like she's going to win by maybe 3 or 4 points. A little bit early, but we're almost got half the vote in. What do we say here? This is a crack. Democrats have been solidly in the majority in these counties, and I think what you're beginning to see with some very creative redistricting are Republicans making inroads.
And I'm going to take it back to our Texas map here, and we can talk about the border. Back in 2018, the border blew there in 2018.
Yes, solidly blue. And again, this is what gave Beto a good race. As I said, the best any Democrat's done in 25 years.
2.9 percentage points. I had to remind myself, that was very incredibly close.
Well, as close as you can get in terms
of 25 years. Yeah.
Votes matter, but the important point now is in 2020, we're seeing that Beto's running about the same. Again, it's too early to say, but now we're getting close to a third of what we think is the voter turnout. We have not seen the turnout from some of these smaller but more numerous counties. But I'm beginning to think that what we're going to see here is a bigger spread between the governor, lieutenant governor, AG, ad commissioner.
And real quick, Bob, this is Harris. New numbers from Harris County. Beto O'Rourke, 62%. Greg Abbott, 37%.
This is mostly probably mail-in voting right now. It's not even the early vote. But what I think is important here in Harris County is if Beto starts running at or about where he was in 2018, he'll pull up what is otherwise a very close race, I think, for the rest of the county races. I think the story here is Abbott's not doing all that much better than I would have expected Beto to do, let's say, against Cruz in 2018. If that's the case, what happens down ballot? Are weaker candidates, particularly like Paxton, let's look over there, there's a 2-point difference here, and I think,
there's
in fact, that's a 1-point difference.
Yeah. To Garza's 48%.
And what's important here is this. That vote for Paxton is close to 400,000 votes less than the governor's getting. That means there are Republicans going in and voting for Greg Abbott, maybe even Dan Patrick, and kind of saying, I can't vote for Paxton, I could vote for Ash, but I'm surely not going to vote for Garza. But as we all know, if you don't vote for Paxton, you're voting for Garza.
So a much tighter race here.
And that much makes a tighter
true
race.
Also for the lieutenant governor's race. Patrick ahead, but again,
this is much too early. This is early.
Sure.
And we don't have what we know to be really strong Republican areas in the West Texas area. These numbers might, crescendo. Just remember that 4 years ago, the governor won by 13 points. He won by even bigger against Wendy Davis.
20 points.
But all Republicans at the top of the ticket since 2012 have seen their margins get smaller and smaller. That, I think, is simply the inevitability of Republicans looking for voters that are not there, that are no longer, how can we say this, alive. And that's why, right tonight, Governor Abbott is down in Hidalgo County, where he thinks Republicans can make big inroads with Hispanic voters on social issues, economic, immigration, and crime.
Right now, O'Rourke leading there with the early vote. We'll send it back to you, Ron and Reka.
The battle for the votes down in South Texas. All right, thank you so much, Grace White.
A lot of this election playing out on social media. Of course, we are hearing from you, voters who are running into issues at the polls. We're hearing folks stump for candidates on social media. Brandy Smith has been doing a lot of our social listening for us, and she is pulling all those tweets and posts that she is finding online right now on this election night. Brandy, what do you have?
Well, Ron and Reka, I wanted to focus on something positive, the photo that everyone has, that I voted sticker. But starting with, there were more than 333,000 in-person ballots cast as of 7 o'clock. We know Harris County had even more folks voting because the polls were extended by that judge's order. So 333,000 in-person ballots. I am sad to say we did not see 333,000 I voted sticker posts, but we did get plenty of them, and this is just a sample. Some messages from these folks, like Elsa said, it was an easy process. Not as easy for Angel, who is 8 months pregnant and spent 2 hours in line voting, but she says, hey, she got her sticker. This was also a ballot that took a lot of research. Harris County's ballot was the longest one in the state. I remember going through, there were 98 different screens. So Jamila posted that she had a lot of research going into being prepared to vote, and she gave the sticker to her daughter, a future voter there. A lot of folks sharing the message that, hey, I don't want to hear your whining after the fact. If you don't vote, this is your chance. And then this person tweeted, go out and vote or don't complain later. I wanted to include this one. This one is my last one because he talks about how awesome it was to see everyone in line tonight. So I waited in line at Baker Ripley on the last day of early voting. I went late. That was my fault, but it took 2 hours and 20 minutes to make it through the line to even get to the voting machines. And I got to tell you, I got great restaurant recommendations from neighbors who live in a different part of the neighborhood. I met an actual neighbor who is part of my HOA who I'd never met in person. So we got to have some HOA conversations there. But it really is a great opportunity if you're voting at your neighborhood polling place to meet those folks, Ron and Reka, and to have those conversations. And it's a reminder, you know, there are a lot of countries where people don't get to do this, and I know waiting for 2 hours is a privilege for so many people, but it is definitely a privilege that we Americans have.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Brandy.
I mean, it's a right that you should be proud to have, right, and a privilege that you should exercise every chance you got. You know. Thank you so much, Brandy Smith. Of course, the chance tonight is over because the polls closed at 8 o'clock. Originally going to close at 7 o'clock, but there were some issues this morning. Throughout the day at some places, and so a civil rights group said, hey, listen, we need to close the polls at 8 o'clock. A judge agreed, and the polls closed at 8 o'clock.
And of course, folks who are standing in line from 7 to 8 o'clock were given provisional ballots, and we wanted to make that clear. But of course, this is coming as we take a live look now at the polling location at West Gray. All of this where on a day of voting that we've seen locations run out of paper for those ballots. Folks at the county, the Harris County Elections Administrator saying the demand was beyond what was expected. They were working to resolve those problems, but all of that, of course, led to the polls being open an extra hour.
Yeah. So this is a live view from NRG, the election center, and we are waiting for the elections administrator to give us some word about the process so far today. We heard from him earlier this evening talking about the polls being extended to 8 o'clock and why that was necessary, and assuring everybody that nothing nefarious was going on. There were some issues, and that closing time of 7 o'clock was challenged in court, and a district judge here in Harris County agreed to extend the hours to 8 o'clock. And so we're going to be hearing from the elections administrator, new on the job, Cliff Tatum, as he gives us an update on just what's going on there at NRG Center.
Yeah, again, NRG Arena, this is elections headquarters. This is where the votes will be taken. This is where they will be counted. This is where we are going to hear from the elections administrator, Cliff Tatum, hopefully in the next couple of minutes. We did hear from him right around 7 o'clock as he spoke about the polling locations being open an extra hour. We're going to be hearing from him again soon. And of course, we will bring that to you as soon as we see him.
Yeah, so stick with us all night long. We're going to be giving you the latest results as soon as they come in. They're going to be trickling in all night. It's a process that takes a lot longer. Election night is a lot different now than it was even just a few weeks ago. I mean, just a few years ago, rather. And so the process could take a few days. It could go longer in some parts of the country. But we're waiting to hear what the election administrator has to tell us, as we're all anticipating a very, very long night and perhaps a long morning.
Yeah, absolutely. Running into a lot of issues today there at NRG Arena, where we're taking a live look right now. They had an issue with almost half of the voting machines there being down and needing to be fixed. We had issues at Baker Ripley over on Navigation Boulevard. They were slow to open because they didn't have the proper election supplies dropped off. Voters at other community centers, as we just checked in with Jeremy Rogalski up in Kingwood, talking about them running out of paper there. So a lot of issues that had to be resolved today. It's going to be quite the marathon tonight as we wait for those election results to come in.
The elections administrator on the phone right now. We'll be hearing from him in just a few minutes, but we've got a lot more coverage ahead for you throughout the night and the morning. Let's send it over to Len and Mia for more on election night.
Your KHOU 11 News election coverage continues now with plenty of developments just in the last couple of hours.
Yes, certainly. There's been some potholes, shall we say. Polls in Harris County closed about 25 minutes ago. It comes after a judge granted an extension in response to a lawsuit filed over voting issues.
Jeremy Rogalski is at a voting center in Kingwood where they ran out of paper ballots earlier.
Here in Kingwood at Shadow Forest Elementary, it's one of many locations this election night that ran out of paper ballots. The big question, why? How could that be? How could you run out of paper? An election worker here tells me they thought they had enough. Based on past elections and historical data, they thought they had sufficient supply. And when they saw that supplies were running low, they called Election Central asking for more paper, but those paper ballots never arrived. Now that the polls are closed, as you can see, a Harris County Sheriff's deputy is waiting to transport the election equipment, the digital drives that store the votes from this location in Kingwood, 36 miles away, to NRG Arena. That is where the Election Central counting process will take place. We're going to be following this deputy's progress throughout the evening. You can tune in online and on the KHOU 11 app for the latest on that journey.
Jeremy Rogowski documenting all the difficulties and the continued journey of those ballots.
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Jeremy. Let's turn now to some election results that have come in.
Grace White joins us live from the KHOU 11 Election Center with the latest numbers. Grace?
We're starting to see votes trickle in across the state. Bob Stein here, our KHOU 11 political analyst. Let's take a look at Harris County first, Bob. What are you noticing here?
Well, it's early. These are just probably the mail-in votes. I would have thought mail-in voting would have been a Republican activity, but of course President Trump's told everybody not to vote by mail, and you can begin to see not a lot of numbers, not a lot of mail-in voting, but 2-1.
All right, let's go up near the Dallas area, Collin County. This is a county we are watching closely. Tell us why.
Well, in 2018, Beto O'Rourke lost it, but he did very well. He came within 5 to 6 points. This margin looks much larger. It's 9. These are hefty votes. This is probably early and mail-in voting. My guess is Collin County goes into the governor's column.
Okay, and finally, let's take a look down at the border. There's been a lot of money spent in this race for these border counties. Hidalgo, where Governor Abbott is tonight, right now, blue with the early vote.
Yeah, again, this is mostly mail-in and maybe some early voting as well. I'm a little surprised, but again, it's too early. I think the governor and the Republicans, they've got 3 good House races down there. I'd look to see a better number, a closer number. I wouldn't be shocked to see these counties flip, but I doubt they will be, but close.
And let's talk statewide again about turnout. What are you seeing?
Well, the turnout, Governor Abbott's campaign manager, Dave Carney, was predicting 10 and maybe 0.2 million votes. I don't think we're going to get to 10. We're going to get to 9.5 maybe, and that's heavy. It won't be a record like it was in 2018, but that was a record of astounding numbers. We were at 53% in 18, 33 in 14. High turnout favors the Democrats. I don't think it's going to hurt candidates like Abbott, but it may have an effect on down ballot races.
And let's take a look at some of those. Here's Lieutenant Governor, the spread right now. Again, it's early, but 52% for Patrick, 46% for Collier. And then if you go to the Attorney General's race, you look at that spread here. Again, 52% for Paxton, 46% for Garza.
I think what you're beginning to see is that Paxton, Lieutenant Governor Patrick, Sid Miller, the Ag Commissioner, they're going to be running behind the governor. But I think they're going to be in a pretty healthy and strong position.
And again, taking a look statewide at the spread right now, it's early, but seeing is that six right now for the spread.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine that Governor Abbott will win this election probably under 10 points, probably somewhere about 6 to 7 percentage points. 2018, he won by 13, 15 against Wendy Davis in 10, when he did extremely well. But these margins really reflect what's happening to Republicans. Closer, more competitive races.
All right, thank you, Bob Stein. Lynn, Mia, we'll send it back to you.
Grace, thank you, guys.
Let's get some quick results while we can. Taking a look here at the race for Harris County Commissioner Precinct 4. Leslie Briones, the Democrat, with 51% of the vote to Jack Cagle's 49%.
Then there's a Brazoria County judge's race. Let's take a quick look here. Matt Sebesta, 62%. He's a Republican, dominating the Democrat Jim Mooney so far in early returns.
So much more to come, so many more races to follow tonight. We'll have the expert analysis and all the numbers for you right here on KHOU 11 and KHOU 11+. We'll see you back here soon.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm Ron Trevino along with Rekha Muniraj as we continue our election coverage tonight, joined by a couple of politicians, experts in politics in their own areas of the aisle, I should say. So Orlando Sanchez, the founder of Texas Latino Conservatives.
And Chris Hollins is with us now, Democrat running for Houston mayor in 2023. And most notably, maybe for the purposes of this appearance right now, you served as Harris County elections administrator during the 2020 election. You have seen things unfold tonight. There are always issues on election day. What are your thoughts on what's going on and the fact that we were able to keep the polls open until 8 o'clock to sort of mitigate some of the issues we were seeing?
Sure. Well, listen, being an election administrator is a really challenging job, plain and simple. It's a massive logistical operation. Today we had nearly 800 voting centers open. And so that's tough on any day. Now, since 2020, we did a lot of things then to make voting as easy, as simple, as straightforward for voters as possible to access the ballot. And then in 2021, the voter suppression law was passed. And now it's much harder to be an election administrator. It's much harder to be an election worker. And it's much harder to be a voter. So we bumped into some of those headwinds today. Now the polls have closed. It's time to count those votes. But it's no question that getting to the polls today is harder than it was 2 years ago.
This is Cliff Tatum's first election here in Harris County. You've been behind the scenes before. What do you think is happening right now, 8:30 on election night? What is he trying to do? What is he trying to fix? And obviously the end goal here is to get every vote counted, but it's going to be a long night for that.
Sure. Well, even before today, our new administrator told us a few weeks ago that we were going to have a long night tonight. What's happening now, once a voting center closes, those election judges are shutting down the machines. They're now going to transport those machines and the paper ballots with them to headquarters. And then when those votes get there, when those machines get to headquarters over at NRG, they're going to start the process of counting the ballots, one location at a time. So we're certainly in for a long night, and with the results looking as they are, they're tight. So every vote's going to count.
Well, Orlando Sanchez, do you think some of these issues were created by the recent laws that Chris is talking about?
No, I'm unaware of any laws that prohibit Harris County from counting the votes as quickly as 253 other counties in the state of Texas. I hope this is not a trend that's developing in Harris County. We are the largest county in the state.
Okay, well, I tell you what, the elections administrator is speaking right now, so let's listen in right now.
The mandamus stayed that temporary restraining order, so all voters who were standing in line after 7 p.m. will no longer be able to cast a provisional ballot. Any voters that were standing in line at 7 p.m. will continue to be processed. We're checking with our judges now to see where they are with processing the last voters that were in line at 7 p.m. I can tell you that as of just minutes before stepping over to you, we have voted in person a little bit over 1 million voters. And we're still, of course, processing mail ballots that were received today. And we will continue releasing results on an hourly basis as they come in from the polling locations tonight. We will continue updating reports every hour on the hour until we complete the results themselves.
So you arrived at a polling location 7 and 8, cast a vote ballot. Those votes are not.
That is correct. So any provisional votes that were cast at the location from 7 p.m. until 8, based on that extended order, would not be counted. No, I do not. No, they will not be counted. And that's part of the reason that, based on the law, that when you have provisional ballots counted based on an extended order, that you segregate them so that if a court determines that they shouldn't be counted, that they aren't added into the total process.
But you know right now that they're not going to be counted.
According to the Supreme Court, they will not be counted.
I know one thing about Seabrook. We've been hearing that there were issues with almost every polling location in Seabrook with no paper.
I can't talk about specifics with Seabrook, but we will certainly be taking a look at every location that indicated they did not have enough paper.
So the places that, for example, it's various locations that are out of paper, there are people who are waiting, right? Because they arrived at 5 or 6, they arrived before 7, and they're waiting for the paper, and say the paper's still not there yet. And let's say the paper gets there, it's 8:30 now, gets there like 8:50. If they cast a ballot, that would not be provisional, right?
So let me back up on that premise and say that the locations that indicated to us that they needed paper, we sent them paper. So I'm not aware that any location that requested paper did not get paper, but we certainly will assess that. So if those voters are standing in line, yes, they would, before 7 p.m., they will have the opportunity to cast a ballot.
But to your knowledge, every place had paper by 7?
To my knowledge.
Are you upset that this happened?
What happened with the provisional ballot? Is it going to be thrown out then?
I'll be talking with the Secretary of State's office and county attorney to make sure we handle them properly.
Are you disappointed as elections administrator that these folks
Well, certainly. We want every voter who has an opportunity to cast a ballot to cast a ballot. And we certainly understand when a court issues an order to extend the hours, that the voters that are covered by that order would be able to cast a ballot. But we also understand that when the Supreme Court comes in and issues a stay to that order, then I follow the orders of the court. That's what I started with the trial court, and I, of course, will follow the Supreme Court's order.
So then you hold on to
That I do not know.
How many votes are we talking about that were provisionally cast after?
That I do not know.
So you hold on to them just in case they can, if there's some sort of a
Yes,
court decision that they can be counted, but right now, as we speak, they cannot be counted.
They are a record that has been created in the elections process, so they will be maintained for review. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. No, the Supreme Court order applies to Harris County.
Now, the folks who filed the original TRO at the district court level are Democratic leaning organizations. The ones who filed up the appeal up to the Supreme Court are Republican organizations. You're an elections administrator. Do you have any idea the provisional ballots, if they're more Democratic or Republican or people from more than one, which party this actually advantages or disadvantages?
No, we would not know how any voter that's casting a provisional ballot would vote.
Where they came from, right?
And I do not know where they came from. Pardon me?
Is there any chance these provisional ballots after 7 o'clock can be counted in the future for the admin table? What would that look like?
I cannot speculate to that. Did we hear, did you ask? That I'm not sure of. I'm not sure that they're here. I do not know. I do not know.
Can you give us a better update on how the rest of the evening goes? Like the state Supreme Court issues a ruling, that's done, it's done, but you still have elections to run. Can you have the early votes in? Where are you looking as far as time frames and expectations for the rest of the evening?
So now our process turns to waiting for the election results to come in from the polling locations. And as those results start being driven in by the polling place judges and their designees, then we will begin tabulating the votes that come into central count. And well, so I think the extension of hours was based on the fact that a number of locations did not open in a timely fashion. And we attempted to assess how many voters that impacted and how many locations that actually was that did not open on time. And to our assessment, that was about 4 locations. So from an overall perspective, I think our election judges has done a tremendous job. As I mentioned earlier, there are 782 locations. A handful of locations experienced problems. We are assessing what those problems were and what caused those problems. By and large, 90% of all polling locations, voters had a good experience. And we will build on that. We will assess what didn't go right. We'll assess what didn't go according to plan, and we will build upon that.
To your knowledge, is
All right, we've been listening to the elections administrator for Harris County, Cliff Tatum, talking about the process today and what has happened in the TRO that extended the voting hours to 8 o'clock, and now the Texas Supreme Court issuing a stay on that TRO. So what does all this mean?
Yeah, it applies to Harris County. Chris Feldman is our KHOU 11 election law analyst. He's standing by to weigh in on this. Chris, your thoughts?
It is a ruling that, unfortunately, I think is going to create even more confusion. It's very surprising to see the Texas Supreme Court reach in and issue an order like this when really it's not going to have any effect. What it does is create more confusion about what's going on right now and what's going to happen in the ensuing days. But at the end of the day, the trial court simply issued an order saying that people that got in line after 7 p.m. Were allowed to cast provisional ballots. And the Supreme Court has dissolved that order, but everyone has already issued their cast their provisional ballots. They've been segregated. And they are to be reviewed by the ballot board in the first place. So the court really seems to have gotten over its skis a bit, in my opinion, and gone a bit far. It's very unusual for the court to do something like this. You oftentimes, all the time, defer to your judge that's on the ground, that can see what's going on and is actually hearing argument. For the Supreme Court to reach in so quickly, too, is surprising, and it's just going to create more confusion, I think, when there didn't have to be any more confusion added to the mix.
Ultimately, who's this going to be up to? These votes that were cast after 8 o'clock, these provisional ballots, ultimately, who's going to make the decision on whether those are valid or not?
Sure. Well, maybe nobody. And what I mean by that is much depends upon the margin of victory for whoever wins a race. And so for this to really get litigated, it would require a specific race that was lost by a number of votes that could be cured by the provisional ballots. So whether anybody takes the time and the effort to ultimately litigate that remains to be seen. That would be an election contest. If there is not a margin of error that exceeds, a margin of loss that would be affected by the provisional ballots, we just may never ultimately know how those ballots are going to be handled. I mean, it won't be litigated to the nth degree is what I'm saying.
So in layman's terms, for folks who did vote between 7 and 8 o'clock tonight, who received that provisional ballot, what does this mean? It doesn't look like their vote is going to be counted?
I wouldn't say that at all, but it's very possible. Yeah, it's very, very possible.
It's a possibility.
It's a definite possibility. That is what the Texas Supreme Court has said, is that we're not going to allow those votes to be counted. But normally that would still get litigated at this point. You could still litigate those issues around it, but if no one wins by or loses by a margin where it makes a difference, then that order stands and it's never really litigated and facts explored.
Is clear, as you said, it does add to the confusion. All right.
Yeah, it's hard. Yes, it's difficult to even explain what they've done because it is so confusing.
Well, we'll be talking with you, I'm sure, later this evening. Chris Feldman, the KHOU election law analyst. Thank you for joining us, Chris. We'll be talking to you again, no doubt, a little bit later tonight. Well, gentlemen, Orlando, what's your take on the Texas Supreme Court basically dissolving these votes that happened between 7 and 8?
Well, I don't know. I haven't read the opinion. I don't know what the arguments was. I'm assuming that the Supreme Court says lack of planning on Harris County's part doesn't constitute an emergency on part of the Texas Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that they would look at it down the line and see just how many provisional ballots were cast and maybe make a decision depending on that? Because again, the polls were kept open later because of all the issues. If there's a significant amount of votes that were placed at that point, do you think that that would be a factor in a decision?
You know, I'm not an attorney, and my friend here, Chris, can probably answer this better. But if this is a pattern in Harris County, I don't know that the courts are going to be sympathetic to extending elections, granting more time, making all sorts of provisions outside the election code. And I think that the lawyers argued the election code, the Supreme Court reviewed it, and they've come down with a decision.
Chris Hollins, you used to have that job as elections administrator. Are you surprised that the Texas Supreme Court weighed in and did this?
Well, like Orlando, I'm not familiar with the facts of why the original judgment was what it was, or the Texas Supreme Court ruling. What I do know is that the last thing you want is for voters to be confused, right? Now, as of 6 p.m. today, everyone knew the polls were going to close at 7, and so we hope that as many people got in line before 7 as possible, and those votes are going to be counted, no questions asked. We have no idea, none of us knows how many votes were cast between 7 and 8. But I think those people voted with the belief that their vote was going to count, and so hopefully we see justice and fairness done there.
Well, let's bring people up to date if they're just tuning in. What happened was a civil rights group saw that there were issues with paper running out or machines not working or polling places opening up late, went before a Harris County district judge and got this TRO to extend the voting hours to 8 o'clock. And then the Texas Supreme Court weighs in and issues a stay against that TRO.
Sure. Well, I know, Harris County is not the only place in the state where this has happened. I know earlier today, Bell County got a similar extension to 8 p.m. Again, don't know the specific facts there. My hope is that folks at the state level aren't cherry picking these counties, and ultimately, again, that everyone across Texas is treated fairly.
All right, Chris, we're so sorry to interrupt you. We actually want to go to Wesley Hunt's campaign. Our Janelle Bluda is out there following this, but we're going to listen to Wesley Hunt speak. He's declaring a victory there. Let's listen in.
Spring to St. John's. Unbeknownst to me, that would be the district that got created. The northern border is Spring Klein and Cypress area. The southern border is actually St. John's. Half of St. John's is in the district and half is not, just north of Westheimer. God has a plan, doesn't he? Standing before you is a great-great-grandson of a man that was born on a plantation. And here I am, the congressman for Congressional District 38, it's a 72% white district. It's the district that President Trump would have won by 25 points, and a black man will proudly be your congressman. And it's not because of the color of my skin. It's not because of the way I look. It's because you believe in me, the person. And I am honored to know that every single day you have granted me the gift of judging me by the content of my character, not by the color of my skin. We have come such a long way in our culture and such a long way in our society, and I would much rather celebrate the progress that we have made in just a handful of generations so we can all have the honor and the privilege of calling ourselves fellow Americans regardless of your race, religion, color, or creed. My job is to work for you. It's not the other way around. And service runs strong in my family. My dad's a retired lieutenant colonel in the Army. My sister's a West Point graduate. I am a West Point graduate, and so is my brother. There's 60 years worth of military service just in my immediate family. And that's the kind of service and sacrifice that it takes. Thank you, sir. That's the kind of service and sacrifice that it takes for us to have the freedoms that we get to endure and get to have every single day. For whatever reason, God blessed our family. We made it back home. Many of my classmates did not. But it's incumbent upon us to continue to find ways to serve for them, since they are no longer here, to serve for themselves. That needs to be our mandate. That needs to be our rallying cry. And although right now it seems like we are pretty divided, I will remind you that this is once a country that ripped itself to pieces during the Civil War, where we had American killing other Americans. This was once a country when the world called on us to end fascism not once but twice in 2 world wars. We rallied together and saved our world twice. There was a time in this country where Vietnam veterans would return home after doing our country's biddings, and they were spat on by fellow Americans. If you're a Vietnam veteran, please raise your hand. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I will never forget, and I will always mention you because we owe you way more than what you got. And I'm here to tell you, thank you. This is a country that had 2 planes slammed into 2 of the most prominent structures in the history of our country. And 1 week later, after 9/11, we couldn't find American flags online because they were all sold out. And if we can endure all of that, I can assure you we can endure Joe Biden. I'll end with this. Roosevelt famously said, it's my favorite quote, "It is not the critic that counts, nor how the man points out how the strong man stumbles, nor how the doer of deeds could have done them better, but the credit belongs to the man who was actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short."
That is Republican Wesley Hunt at the Post Oak Hotel, saying he will probably be your congressman. He's declaring a victory there for District 38, and we're joined now by our experts here, Orlando Sanchez and Chris Hollins, to weigh in on this now.
Yeah, well, he's a Republican. Let's check in with our Republican. You're not surprised by this?
No, this was a congressional seat designed for a Republican in the reapportionment process, and so it's not surprising that Wesley Hunt, who did very well in the primary, is now apparently going to be the congressman-elect for the 38th.
He got in a dig against President Biden there, too, at the end of his thank you speech just now.
Sounds like he's ready to go to work.
Mr. Hollins, your take?
Yeah, I mean, this is after gerrymandering and redistricting took place in 2021. This new district, 38, was drawn to be 30-plus points Republican. Now, the growth that we've seen in Texas in the last 10 years has been 90% driven by people of color. And so the fact that seat 37 and 38, the 2 new seats, were drawn to be Republican districts, decreasing the amount of minority representation is a travesty. But look, we wish Wesley Hunt well. He won his election fair and square.
You know, it's interesting, though, but we have Tony Gonzalez, we have Mayra Flores, and we have Wesley Hunt, so we're getting Republicans of color. So it's not the argument that people of color can't be elected. They are getting elected. They're just getting elected on the other side.
But what about the issue about how these districts are set up and how they're divided? Do
you mean in terms of partisanship?
Yes.
Yeah, well, there's they say the victory goes, the spoils go to the victor. There's a reason why Republicans fought so hard to win the legislature, because, as Chris says, we were up for redistricting, and so there is an advantage to holding the legislature and the governor's position in a district that in a year that you have to redistrict.
And both parties do this. We should be. We should mention that this is not. It's on both ends.
I would expect the Democrats to do the same thing.
All right. Well, it's going to be a long night, long morning. We've seen the election extended to 8 o'clock, and we've heard the Texas Supreme Court weigh in on that. An interesting night. It's going to be an interesting morning, and we've got much more coverage ahead.
Absolutely. We're going to go down now to Len Cannon and Mia Gradney with more on our election coverage.
Don't go away, people.
Mia Gradney and Lynn Cannon in the KHOU 11 News Studio with even more breaking news on this election night. So much developing. The Texas Supreme Court has issued a ruling on the court-ordered extended hour for voting in Harris County. That was that extended hour after 7 o'clock.
Yeah, so earlier this evening, we learned that a civil rights group had filed a lawsuit because there were issues with some voting locations not opening on time, allowing people to vote. So that civil rights organization then asked a Harris County judge to extend the voting hours to 8 o'clock. That judge said, yes, let's do it. All right. Then later, the Texas Supreme Court said all people who voted from 7 to 8, those cannot be provisional ballots. In fact, have to be separated. Cheryl Mercedes is at election headquarters at NRG. What a mess, Cheryl. Tell me what you're hearing.
So what we know at this point is that folks who stood in line at 7 o'clock, their votes are going to be counted as they typically would be. However, those in line after 7 until the 8 o'clock hour, and then after that until the poll closes, we're told those will be counted as provisional votes. Those ballots will be provisional. Now, what that means is I'm getting clarification now from the Harris County Administrator's Office. They're saying, the election administrator is saying that what this means was what he mentioned earlier during this news conference and what you're about to hear in the soundbite we're going to play is that those provisional ballots will be counted, but they're going to be separated from the votes that were in at 7 o'clock and before then, just until he gets further instruction on how and when those votes will be counted during the extended hours that were issued this evening.
We want every voter who has an opportunity to cast a ballot to cast a ballot. And we certainly understand when a court issues an order to extend the hours that the voters that are covered by that order would be able to cast a ballot. But we also understand that when the Supreme Court comes in and issues a stay to that order, then I follow the orders of the court.
I'm just told by the communications office for the Harris County Elections Administrator that Cliff Tatum will be giving an update to clarify some of his statements from earlier. So we will get the information that he's going to give us here shortly. We're told this is regarding how those provisional ballots will be handled. He wants to make a clarification. I'm told it will be similar to what I just told you. They told me before I came out here to you live that it's not that they won't be counted, it's how they're going to be handled. He's waiting on further instruction from the Secretary of State's office, and as soon as we hear back on what exactly that will mean for those votes, we'll get back to you and let you know.
And that's the true definition of a provisional ballot as well. These are ballots that are often segregated and separated from the rest and counted at a later date. A lot going on, a lot to clear up and clarify.
Yeah, we had to clear that up. I think even the elections administrator, Clifford Tatum, was a little confused. So that's why he wants to come back, try and set the record straight based on what the Supreme Court stepped in and said later this evening. Like I said, a lot going on tonight.
Certainly so. There are more issues at another voting location in the Heights. Anayeli Ruiz is live at Wainwright Elementary now. Anayeli?
Hey guys, yes, if you can hear me out here, we're outside of an elementary school, and that confusion trickling down out here. A lot of people who were in line thinking that they could cast their ballot until 8 o'clock, they were told, they were actually turned away and said that they couldn't vote, and those people very upset because a lot of those people actually saw that they were going to be able to vote until 8 p.m. So they decided to come right before those polls were going to close. There was even some arguing out here, some fights. One voter said she waited over 2 hours to cast her ballot.
Oh goodness, the voting experience, it's one I will remember for sure. A lot of upset voters just because there wasn't a lot, of movement, in the lines when you're here waiting in line to vote. So it was definitely, an experience that I'll remember.
And again, those voters hoping that this is all clarified soon. We'll send it back to you in the studio.
Anayeli, thank you for the update from that polling location.
We'll be back in just a little bit more to bring you live updates.
Welcome back, everybody. It's 9 o'clock. Thanks for staying with us as we cover the election results as best we can get them and as best we can sort out the confusion of the day with TRO and Texas Supreme Court weighing in on votes that were from 7 to 8 o'clock, provisional, counting, not counting.
It's going to be a long legal battle for that as well, the provisional votes that were cast between 7 and 8 o'clock tonight. It's 9 o'clock. We are seeing some results come in. We've had at least one candidate, or Wesley Hunt, already declaring victory. But again, those votes are coming in. Those numbers are coming in now. And Grace White is following that with our KHOU 11 political analyst, Bob Stein. Let's go over to them.
Ron Rega, here are the latest numbers from Wesley Hunt's race. We just heard him speaking a few minutes ago. Bob, 54.3% to Duncan's 44.9%.
No big surprise here. This was a carefully crafted district. It was one of the new districts in the state, and it was driven largely by Republican voters. The fact that an African-American Republican won the seat may be of some newsworthiness, but Wesley Hunt's been in the hunt, so to speak, for a House seat for a good part of the last decade. Of course, he lost to Fletcher in 2018. He didn't decide to come back until redistricting because by that time a district could be fashioned, and one that I think is clearly he'll hold on for as long as he wants.
Let's go now, Bob, to the border. There's 3 counties we're watching there very closely. Texas District 28, Henry Cuellar, 56.7% of the votes. 47% reporting at this time.
Yeah, I mean, Henry Cuellar has been in there a long time, been investigated. Of course, he was in a tough primary race.
Term.
Yeah, and he weathered that by a nose. And what's interesting is that Democrats came back to him because Henry Cuellar really isn't what you call a progressive Democrat. He's not a moderate Democrat. He opposes abortion, has oftentimes been very critical of the Biden administration on border policy.
And we did see President Clinton in the final days of the campaign.
It was that important that the moderates and the conservatives in the party came together.
Let's go to this middle district, though. This is the middle of the sandwich here, and right now trending red.
Yeah, Monica De La Cruz against Michelle Vallejo. That race is going to hold up. It'll be a Republican gain, but it's a little tricky. What they did was they took these 3 districts and they recarved them, if you want, configured them to at least get one.
After the 2020 census.
They had hoped to get 2. Of course, they didn't. And I think the important point here, Gonzalez moved out of what it was once the 15th district, found himself a nice blue district, and he's, of course, done very well.
About a 6% spread there. And then here is the other side of the border here, if we can pull that one up. Gonzalez, the incumbent who was in this district and then switched to run in this district, he says because of the redistricting, Gonzalez right now up 53% over Flores, 43%.
The story tonight, of course, is about how Republicans, the governor is in Hidalgo County, hoping to take the county. And
yeah, he's right here.
He will do much better, and clearly I think he has a reason to be pleased with what Republicans. The future of the Republican Party didn't look really what I call bright in the last decade as they lost more voters, but they've made finally really inroads. We see this not only in Texas, but of course tonight in Florida, all of Miami-Dade going red. So I think what the Republicans have to feel is going into the 2024 election, which of course is presidential, they can now really start looking at places like Florida, which I think is now solidly red, and begin to expand, and the expansion will be in New Mexico and Arizona. And eventually I think they feel they can do well in parts of California.
And let's look at this balance of power right now. 47 Democrats, 83 Republicans. This is the House.
Well, I don't think anyone has any doubt that the Republicans will take the House. The only question, as we said before, is by how many seats. And I think when the night's over with, somewhere between 20 and 25 seats will be the gain for the Republicans.
And let's take a look, if we have some time, at the Senate. Balance of power here in the Senate. This is one of the races that we are watching closely in the Senate, the race in Georgia. Right now, very, very close. 49% Walker, 49% Warnock. He is the incumbent.
You missed an important point here, 49%. If these numbers hold up throughout the evening, no one will win tonight. There'll be a runoff. And that 2% is worth something.
Very interesting.
It's a 7,000 vote difference. We're at 57%. We have no idea where these votes are coming from, whether they're Macon, Gwinnett, or in Valdosta. But the important point is, if somebody doesn't get 50% plus 1, that's a runoff in January.
Arizona still waiting there for results. Pennsylvania, we've also been watching this closely. Fetterman versus Oz, 51% Fetterman on top right now to Oz's 47%.
Take a look at New Hampshire, too. I think that was emblematic, if I could. Hassan is, of course, the incumbent, and she's running rather heavily ahead of course, Baldock, who is a Trump-endorsed candidate from the primary, former military, emblematic of the Trump campaign throughout all of this country. Well, we don't know until we see those numbers get a little higher.
And again, the balance of power right now sitting for the U.S. Senate, 41-40.
Let's take a look at Wisconsin. This one might be a bit of a surprise, at least it was to me. Barnes, Manila Dunn, we got close to half the vote in, and Barnes, who is not projected to do well, particularly in the polls, is running ahead. Now, it could be Dane and Milwaukee County, which are traditionally Democratic, big urban areas. We haven't seen Chippewa Falls and many of the rural areas, but that could be a pickup for the Democrats.
We'll keep watching that. Thank you, Bob. Send it back to you.
Bob Stein and Grace White watching the balance in power in Washington. Thank you so much.
All right, we want to go back now to NRG Arena. That is election headquarters. That is where they are counting the votes. And Cliff Tatum, the elections administrator for Harris County, is clarifying some issues that were brought up. Let's listen in.
Stop the read to produce reports. Those will be released to the public at 10 p.m. Okay? Those provisional ballots will be set to the side until I receive further instruction, either from the Secretary of State, either from the court, or from the district court, or from the Supreme Court. No, I do not. No, I do not.
You don't know where they came from?
And I do not know where they came from.
Art, had you been informed by the county attorney's office that there might be some legal action in addition to the Supreme Court stay, like have some sort of...
Well, a stay is a stay, so I need to be advised on what the next steps are. And once I know that, then we'll make you aware of that.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you all.
All right, we've been listening to the Harris County Elections Administrator, Cliff Tatum, trying to clear up some things that were said earlier, but it's still a confusing evening. He did say that the provisional votes, those were cast after 7 o'clock, between 7 and 8, will be set aside after the stay was issued by the Texas Supreme Court.
Which is essentially what we were told would happen in the first place. We were told that the polls would be open from 7 to 8. Those are provisional ballots. Of course, they have to go back and make sure all of those people who voted between 7 and 8 are registered voters, and whether or not they would count would be up for consideration with the courts and down the line. So that's kind of what we've been hearing, but there is a lot of sort of technical things, legal jargon that's happening that can be very confusing for voters. But Cliff Tatum, the elections administrator, just wanting to clarify that no matter what, those provisional ballots are in. They're going to set them aside until they can be properly dealt with.
He looks like a man in the hot seat.
Yes.
Because those votes may not count. We don't know. We just don't know yet. Len Cannon is looking at what's going on at the other counties around Harris County. We've got some live cams out there. Len Cannon.
Hey, Ronnie and Reka, thank you. Now, our election coverage has been consumed by this legal back and forth that you've been talking about. There's one thing for certain we do know. All of the polling places are now closed across the state of Texas. These are live count cams. This is where the vote count is happening in various counties in the Houston area. This is Galveston County. You can't see anybody in this shot right now, but they are going to start counting votes in Galveston County. That started about an hour ago. Let me go up to here to Brazoria County. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 8 polling workers here, probably going through ballots and beginning the count process in Brazoria County. Now to Montgomery County. This is a live camera. We don't see anybody in this particular room. Doesn't mean there's another room where there is some activity happening. Fort Bend County, we do see some workers. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 workers there starting to count the ballots. And then we have Harris County Elections Headquarters at NRG. This is where all the problems are going to be developing, and this is where it's going to be a very late night, because out of the 780 plus polling locations, they didn't close until 8 o'clock, as we've been explaining to you, an hour later. And that means all of those tabulations will have to be brought to this location, and some of those places are 45 minutes to potentially an hour away. So it could be, initially, we were told from Clifford Tatum, the Harris County Elections Administrator, that votes in Harris County probably 2 a.m. Now maybe 3 or later in the morning before we get all the votes tabulated. And then, of course, we have to figure out those provisional ballots. So that's where we stand with the vote tabulations in the Houston region. Ron and Rake?
And a night with all sorts of twists and turns. All right, thank you so much, Len Can, and what's going to be a very long night for us and morning.
Yeah, those live vote count cams are really popular. People like to watch. People like to feel like they're behind the scenes. Someone who's very familiar with the elections process here, Chris Holland's joining us now, the elections administrator back in 2020. A very different time. It was the height of the pandemic. You were dealing and basically putting into effect drive-through voting, and you had 24-hour voting. We are running into a lot of issues today on this election day with running out of paper, not having the right equipment breaking down. Is all of this just par for the course? Because, the elections that you ran, many said were very successful, but you also ran into problems as well.
Sure. I mean, things like a machine breaking down, they're pretty common in elections. Now, there's so much scrutiny, folks paying attention to every little detail. And so I think we're seeing a lot more sort of in this behind the scenes view.
Yeah, and now, we need to point out this wasn't happening everywhere.
No,
I mean, we're talking about 1 or 2 locations. Today we had nearly 800 voting locations, and you had a few that faced some challenges. Now I'll tell you one thing. One of the laws that got passed in 2021 said that the election administrator can no longer visit polling sites proactively just to monitor and make sure everything's okay. Right. And so now you can only come either to bring supplies or to solve a problem. Whereas in 2020, we had county clerk staff on site at nearly every single location just to be an extra set of hands and make sure things went smoothly. And now that's illegal in Texas.
And do you think that factored into some of the problems or issues? Do you think those could have been mitigated if we had more eyes on it?
Absolutely. I mean, you think about something like running out of paper, right? If you had someone on staff just paying attention, you would have seen that earlier, and there would have been an opportunity to come and solve that challenge before it became an issue.
Okay, so what would you do if you rule the world? What would you do for the next election if you were the elections administrator here in Harris County?
Sure. Well, look, first, we got another legislative session coming up. They need to repeal so many of those laws that made doing this job so difficult, that made the job of the election worker more risky, so that there are fewer people who want to do the job of an election worker. I mean, one of the late opening sites today was because election workers resigned because they no longer wanted to take the risk of potentially being charged with some kind of crime if they made a mistake, right? So there's these little things that make the job harder, that make it harder to vote, and that's number one. We need to repeal that law. But as the election administrator, you have to double and triple check all these things. I mean, you have to overestimate the kind of turnout you're going to have and make sure that in a day like today, where more than 300,000 people showed up, which is a great thing for democracy, that we have the supplies and the resources in order to accommodate them and make their voting experience one that's simple and easy.
Well, let's take, for example, we went to a polling location in Atascocita where Jeremy Rogowski was, one of our reporters, and he said they ran out of paper there, and it's because the people in charge of that polling area were basing it on trends in the past and how many people showed up to vote in previous elections and things like that. And then when they put in a request to get more paper, the paper never came. I mean, is that something that was that just an aberration because so many more people voted this year than 2 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not in a place right now where I can second guess everything that happened today. Again, we do have issues like this on a regular basis. Back in 2020, we had roving repairmen and service people who, in 5 or 10 minutes could show up and try to help you address.
And we don't have those
any
anymore?
issue.
We don't have any?
I'm not sure, honestly.
I see, yeah.
A lot of folks, though, are surprised because they know that these were hotly contested races. These are very close. There was a fire lit under the residents saying, we want to vote, especially here in Texas. So many issues that people felt so strongly about. So a lot of people not understanding the lack of anticipation for the turnout for Election Day today. But obviously, the elections administrator, Cliff Tatum, trying to resolve a lot of those issues. But it's going to take a while. When it comes to the provisional ballots that were cast between 7 and 8, that's going to be kind of a long legal journey as well. I mean, any thoughts on when we could possibly see the results of whether or not those will count in this election?
Hopefully the courts move quickly to solve that.
Okay.
What we deserve is certainty and comfort of knowing if those votes are going to count or not. And again, when you go and cast a ballot, that's something that's so important in this country. And you want that vote to count, and we should lean towards counting those votes when we say the polls are going to be open. And so I'm just hoping, again, that this is an even-handed judgment. Whatever happens in Harris County is the same that happens in Bell County and other places where they extended the polls. But hopefully, those folks who came and cast ballots in good faith that they were going to be able to take place in democracy and use their voice tonight can have their voices heard.
Well, it would really make a big difference in tight races. I mean, if it's a tight race if it's a tight race that you lost, and you're looking at those provisional ballots as maybe those might have been your supporters, then you might launch some kind of legal battle to have them count.
Yeah, I mean, what we'll never know is what's in them, right?
Or not count, yeah.
The decision will be made whether to count them or not without knowing how those votes were cast. But you're right. I mean, almost every election in the county right now is separated between 5,000 and 15,000 votes. We don't know at this moment how many votes were cast between 7 and 8. But if it feels like it might be a difference maker and you were on the short end of that election, yeah, you might be banging the drum asking the courts to go and look at those votes. So we'll see.
Chris Hollins, thank you so much. You're sticking around until 10 o'clock. We're going to get you to weigh in on some other issues, but right now we're going to go to Jeremy Rogalski. The last time we saw him, he was in Kingwood at a polling place there that ran out of paper. It was an issue that wasn't resolved, and a lot of folks were turned away, very unhappy about not being able to cast their vote. But right now he's following a counter from Kingwood to NRG Arena. That's where the ballots are being taken and will be counted. Jeremy, are you there?
I sure am, Reka. Yeah, even without all the mishaps that we've been reporting on throughout the evening, it is already a long road to tabulate election night returns in Harris County. And what we're talking about is what we're going to show you right here. We're following a Harris County Sheriff's deputy making our way from Shadow Forest Elementary School, a polling location in Kingwood, on a 36-mile trip to the Election Central Counting Center at NRG Arena. This is, again, one of 782 polling locations, and all the results, all the equipment have to be driven physically to NRG because Texas law forbids returns from being transmitted electronically. Now let's take a look at some video of that elementary school. The polls closed at 8 o'clock because of the delay, and it took about a solid 45 minutes for the election workers there to shut down the equipment, to review the paperwork, the chain of custody forms, all of that stuff that we've reported on to get those ballots on the move. The sheriff's deputy took off from that elementary school about 9:02. So what we wanted to show folks in real time is how long it takes just for this equipment and these votes to get to NRG. We have another piece of video here to show you who is driving all these ballots tonight in Harris County. Well, again, there's 782 polling locations. 559 of those locations, the presiding judge will take the equipment and the paper ballots and the machines that store the digital drives. They will drive themselves to NRG. 153 polling locations will utilize deputized county employees. These are delegates or designees from those presiding judges. They will be doing the delivery duties. And then at 80 locations, law enforcement officers will be transporting those ballots to Election Central KHOU. So back live here, we're heading south on 5969. We're approaching FM 1960, and we hit the road about 9:02. Again, our trip is 36 miles long, and we're about 15 minutes into the journey. Once we arrive at NRG, there's a whole other process. There's a drop-off line and a receiving line where there's more checks and balances of validating the equipment, that it matches the correct poll, certifying everything, and that might take another 10 to 12 minutes before those digital drives are actually uploaded. And as we've been saying all night long, Ron and Rake, it bears repeating, Harris County equipment can only read 2 drives at a time, and we're roughly talking 800 drives. So you do that math, we're talking 400 minutes, which is 6.5 hours, and we got a late start on the evening. And so, originally the thought process was maybe Harris County could get preliminary results by about 1:30 or 2. This is going to go well beyond that. We're probably at least talking 2:30 or 3. So that's what we're doing. Again, we're on 5969, following the sheriff's deputy on the road to tabulate Harris County votes. We'll send it back to you.
Jeremy Rogalski reporting on the road. Thank you so much. Really illustrating, yes, that deputies are driving the results to NRG Arena where those votes will be counted. Until 2018, they were able to send those results electronically, but they can't do that anymore. They have to physically take them. Jeremy did the math here, and he's saying it's going to be about 6.5 to 7 hours before all those results will make it in. Of course, we got a late start. Polls closed a little later, so things are going to get delayed. Yeah. So it's going to be, early morning, 3 or 4 o'clock until we really start to see some results there.
And we're all about accuracy and not speed.
Yes.
I think everybody's on board with that. I think we do have some totals. Let's look at some of our graphics if we could right now. For Fort Bend County Judge KP George, 51% of the vote. To Trevor Nails, 49%. Those are just early votes right now. Nails has been in politics there for quite a while. Okay, let's look at the other big race here. Harris County Judge, hotly contested race here. Lina Hidalgo with 51% to Alexandra Mealer's 49%. These again are just early votes, so things are subject to change, but right now the Democrat is ahead in that race. And Brazoria County Judge, Matt Sebesta with 62% of the vote. Jim Mooney with 38% of the vote. Galveston County Judge, Mark Henry with 65% to William H. King's 35%. House District 38, well, we heard from Wesley Hunt earlier with his victory speech, talking about his family and his district and the future for him and that district. He's got 64% of the vote. He's declared himself the winner in that race against Duncan Klussman. The other hot race, Greg Abbott, 54% to Beto O'Rourke, 45%. We've got reporters at both their watch parties for Greg Abbott down in the valley, for Beto O'Rourke in his home of El Paso. We'll see how that night progresses for both of these candidates, the incumbent and the challenger. Dan Patrick, longtime lieutenant governor, 54% of the vote. The challenger, Mike Collier, has 44% of the vote. This is a rematch of these two candidates. Right now, Dan Patrick, the incumbent, has the lead for lieutenant governor. Attorney General. This one was tight earlier. Ken Paxton with 54% of the vote, the incumbent. The challenger, Rochelle Garza, with 44% of the vote. It was tighter earlier, but things changed throughout the evening and the morning. But the Republican incumbent with the lead right now for Attorney General. For Comptroller, Glenn Hager, 57%. Janet Dudding has 41%. The Republican in the lead there. Land Commissioner Don Buckingham, 56%. Jay Kleberg, 42%. The Democrat trailing right there. Ag Commissioner Sid Miller has 56% of the vote, the Republican. Susan Hayes, the Democrat, has 44%.
All right, we're joined now by our experts for the night, Chris Hollins and Orlando Sanchez, talking a little bit about these races. I want to start with the Harris County Judge. We saw within 2 percentage points there, so close between Lina Hidalgo and Alex Mealer. We heard Alex Mealer speak a little earlier tonight. She seemed very confident in her grassroots campaign. What do you make about the progress she's making tonight?
Well, look, I mean, she raised $8.7 billion. It's almost an unprecedented amount for a Harris County Judge race. So certainly there was no lack of resources in this race. This is now demonstrating with 2 adequately funded candidates that Harris County's back in play, albeit the results right now are indicating a slight favor for the Democrats, but it's a lot of money.
Do you have any confidence that Lina can pull it off, Lina Hidalgo?
Again, we got to count these votes, and for those who think their vote doesn't count, we're seeing right here in Harris County and in Fort Bend County that every single vote's going to matter.
All right, we're out of time. Let's go back to Len and Mia with more coverage.
We are back now with more election night coverage, and boy, is there a lot to cover. We just received an update from Harris County elections officials on a Texas Supreme Court ruling.
Yeah, election officials now say provisional votes cast in Harris County between 7 and 8 p.m. will be put to the side for now.
Adam Bennett joins us live from election headquarters with even more clarification. Adam.
So, Mia, just a few minutes ago, the elections administrator offered what he called a clarification of comments that he had made just 30 minutes earlier. He said, quote, "No votes are being thrown out." He says, yes, those provisional ballots that were cast by people who were in line at the polls after 7 p.m., between 7 to 8 p.m. tonight, would be put aside. They would be counted separately, kept in a separate area, and not added to the count tonight. But he said at this point, they would just be kind of in limbo, just waiting until they get further instruction from the courts on what exactly to do with those votes. So at this point, they are still in kind of a limbo phase. Right now, here at Election Central, about 30 minutes ago, we just saw the first votes from the polling stations arriving here. About 7 had arrived so far, according to the elections administrator. Many more will continue to come throughout the night. More than 300,000 people cast a ballot in person today on Election Day. So it is going to be a long night of counting votes. It already was going to be a long night, and then that hour later that the polls were open is going to add to that even further. So still the elections administrator expecting about a maybe 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock finish counting up all these votes. But again, that's kind of a fluid number. But again, at this point, the very first votes have started arriving here at Election Central here at Energy Arena from all different points across the county after the elections admin offered some clarification on his comments earlier about those provisional votes. We'll send it back to you.
We have come to anticipate problems, especially in a county this size, but tonight is really something different and unique. Adam Bennett, thank you.
Yeah, we've turned another chapter here. Naturally, this change in the voting hours has caused some confusion. And this just in, we're hearing from Harris County residents who say they were turned away at the polls.
Now, they went to the polls after 7 o'clock tonight when they heard the polling hours were extended to 8, but they say they were still turned away.
We're in there waiting in line, but at 8 o'clock, the people that hadn't voted had us fill out an affidavit. So the affidavit was filled out so we can vote, and they would be casted and counted. And when we were about to go and get and vote, the Supreme Court, they got some message over the phone or some systems saying the Supreme Court had revoked it and saying that no more, that we couldn't vote. So 11 of us that were waiting in there to vote that had filled out affidavit didn't get a chance to vote.
What's your reaction to that?
That's not fair. That's not fair at all because, I'm a U.S. citizen and I have the right to vote.
Hearing from a voter there at the Baker Ripley voting location. That's on Navigation on the east end. Of course, we'll have more on this on KHOU.com and also in our digital show coverage.
All right, let's take a look at the Texas governor's race right now. And this, according to some polls, was expected. Governor Greg Abbott looking to go for a third term, 54% to 45% over Beto O'Rourke. Beto O'Rourke in some polling got as close as 5%, statistically a dead heat with the governor not showing up tonight in this race. As you can see, Abbott, who has touted security on the border, who has touted crime and safety, who has talked about his role in changing the abortion laws in Texas, he is winning and probably will walk away as governor for a third term.
And O'Rourke, of course, focused on the response, or what he says is lack of response in Uvalde, and calling for accountability there. Also pressuring the governor on the grid failure with the winter storm. And these numbers, by the way, that we're looking at right now, that's about with 27% of the returns that we're looking at, with Governor Greg Abbott with the lead at 54% and his challenger O'Rourke with 45% for now.
All right, and let's take a look at the Attorney General's race. Now, this was close earlier, but not close anymore. The incumbent, Ken Paxton, 54%. Civil rights attorney Rochelle Garza, she was only a point behind about 45 minutes ago, and now you see she's down 11 with 43%. So this is going as many people expected, maybe not as wide as expected, but Ken Paxton was the one statewide race that many thought would be in trouble. But based on these numbers, he may not be.
The night is still young, even at 9:29. We have so much more to bring you coming up at 10 o'clock and also continuing our coverage on KHOU 11+.
Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us for what is going to be a long night and morning for so many people, so many candidates, so many voters out there. Some voters who are now wondering whether their vote counted or not if they voted past 7 o'clock this evening. That is a whole other issue right there.
We've seen a lot of voting issues today, including in the Sunnyside area. Brandy Smith has more on that.
I got here 5 a.m.
Before she even starts to explain her morning, you can see the emotion in Loren Johnson's eyes, and you can hear the frustration in her voice.
I have watched so many cars pull up and drive away, pull up and drive away.
Johnson says when the polling location at Sunnyside Multi-Service Center was supposed to open, poll workers informed those in line the machines weren't working.
The machines are broken?
About 7:30, 7:40, they finally came out with a list of closer locations and provided us with that list to go to those locations. And people started to filter out at that time.
She decided to wait in her car, where her sister encouraged her to post that first TikTok video.
This is not right, y'all. This is not right. There were old people standing in line, and this isn't right. We gotta do better. People should be able to vote.
And to watch those in the community that got up early and moved and grooved and shuffled there, having to difficultly shuffle back, not knowing if they could make it back. I was in a state of disbelief, and I couldn't help but just cry.
You decided to go to another location, and what was your experience there?
Their machines had gone down.
We need to do better. I guess we do better by voting, right? And I guess that's the point.
Fed up, she went back to her original polling place and shared her final update.
It's 9:25. I'm going to go vote. Sunnyside Multi-Service Center, machines are up.
Johnson told me the right to vote is something she feels passionately about and was one of the factors that led her to serve in the military for 20 years.
I'm never one to just, do a whole bunch of rah, but being connected to things that we serve for is really near and dear to my heart.
It unlocked something today in a lot of people.
Well, I hope it made them, it reminded them to go back and vote or go vote, or I'm going to go vote because that wasn't right. So hopefully people voted. I hope.
KHOU 11 learned the reason for that delay at Sunnyside Multi-Service Center was a precinct judge who accidentally closed the voting machines instead of opening them, and that took a couple hours to resolve.
People are passionate about voting. I mean, a lot is said about voter apathy out there, but there are plenty of people out there who are passionate, like the people we just saw in that story about the right to vote, the privilege to vote, and the issues that they had today trying to get to vote, waiting for hours and then having to leave and then come back later. Some people had to go through that.
Yeah, this is a privilege people take very seriously, and people were very fired up to vote in this election. There are a lot of issues that they feel very strongly about, so I think a lot of people can understand and feel where that woman was coming from. Very emotional about the delay in being able to do that and the frustration surrounding all of that.
Well, the history of America is voter suppression.
Absolutely.
Not encouraging voting.
TSU constitutional law professor Martin Levy joining us along with Orlando Sanchez, the founder of Texas Latino Conservatives. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Sure.
We want to talk to you really about the big issue tonight, which is the now the Supreme Court issuing that stay on the TRO. But folks, being able to vote from 7 to 8 o'clock at night, given those provisional ballots, and now we don't know what is happening with that. Can you walk us through exactly how all of this came about and what voters can expect?
Well, the most difficult thing I think for people to understand is a stay. And a stay is not winning or losing. A stay is a temporary order that you can achieve because if the harm you allege, which would here be I couldn't vote, is irreparable, can't be undone. That's the first thing you must prove to get a stay. Well, obviously, if you don't make a provision for people voting, then the harm would be irreparable. No matter what someone decided, you couldn't vote. And the second requirement is that you have a reasonable chance of being successful in your claim about your vote being suppressed. So that is all that's happened. The actual case has not been decided. The fact that they've voted and they'll keep their votes separated then affords time for a court to actually hear the case.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So it's putting things on hold, basically, right?
Yes.
It's pushing the pause button and things are on
Well,
hold.
and the votes are there, so if they win, they could be counted.
Mm-hmm.
They could lose, they will not be counted.
But does voter suppression have to be proven? Does it have to, I mean, who is making the case now for those votes to be counted? Is it going to be Harris County? Who does the onus lie on to prove that these votes need to be counted?
Well, the defense ultimately rests with the state, but the city of Houston and the county are part of the state. Okay. So much of that would depend upon the nature of the limitation at 7. Okay, how much the statute might allow, if there was a real problem, voting to be extended. And then, look, there are politics.
Mm-hmm.
And politics generally mean that a majority will do all that it can to succeed itself.
Mm-hmm.
That's history, okay?
Well,
and that won't be absent any matriculation on what happens, in this regard.
Yeah, politics takes various forms on a political day, voting day, election day. Okay, let's go back to Jeremy Rogowski, tracking the votes that were coming from Atascocita all the way to NRG to be counted. Hey, Jeremy.
Hey, Ron. Yeah, we're in what's normally the KHOU 11 weather tracker, but tonight it's doubling as what you might call the KHOU 11 ballot tracker. Take a look out the front windshield. We have been following and tracking the progress of this Harris County Sheriff's deputy who left Shadow Forest Elementary with ballot equipment, with election equipment, the ballot box, the storage, digital drives that store the votes around 9:02 p.m. We are just approaching downtown as we speak. It's about 9:37. So 35 minutes so far on what is a total 36-mile trip. The reason we're doing this, aside from all the mishaps and delays and drama that we've been reporting on tonight, is to share with our viewers just the logistical challenge that is Harris County elections. When you're talking 782 polling locations across nearly 1,800 square miles, and they all must be physically driven to election central count at NRG Arena, it's quite an undertaking. So this deputy that we're looking at right now on 59, we're approaching Minute Maid Park, is one of 80 law enforcement officers who is handling those delivery duties for that election equipment. So it's quite a monumental feat just to get everything, all those returns from all those locations back to NRG. This one little test run that we're doing here in real time has already taken us about 35 minutes. Once he arrives at NRG, he'll be met by a drop-off team where they have to validate and check that the equipment matches the polls, and that's a process that could take 10 to 15 minutes in and of itself before those digital drives are actually uploaded into the system. And again, they have to rinse and repeat that nearly 800 times. We're told it takes about 1 minute to read each of those drives, and get this, we've said it again, it bears repeating, Harris County equipment can only read 2 drives at a time. So we're talking, add up all that math, and here's the skinny. Just to read those drives, once they get here, we're talking 6 to 6.5 hours. And given the hour-long delay that we've already experienced tonight, this whole thing might be 3:30 in the morning before preliminary results, Ron and Rake, are finally tabulated in Harris County.
All right, Jeremy Rogowski, in this digital age, a lot of things, even in an election, are done the old-fashioned way, physically taking the ballots to NRG following a deputy who's delivering them. All right, thank you so much, Jeremy. Be safe out there on the roads.
Yeah, keeping in mind that until 2018, those results were delivered electronically, so different process now. This is why it takes so long to get all of those votes in. With people, especially folks wondering why are we seeing results at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., this is part of all of it. We are getting some results in, though, some precincts reporting. Let's go to Grace White now over in our election center with more. Grace.
We're breaking down the governor's race, Rika and Ron, taking a look at where things stand right now. A double-digit lead for the governor, 55% to 44%. And talk to us about these numbers, Bob.
Well, we probably have over half the vote cast, maybe as close to 60%. And of course, we're now seeing the vote coming from other areas other than the big metroplexes. And this 11-point spread is probably going to grow. It's quite possible the governor will win by a margin like he matched in 2018, 13 points, maybe even higher. Again, I think what you're seeing here is not a question of whether, it's just simply the margin. What I find interesting is I would have thought some of the down ballot candidates like Patrick and of course Paxton would be beginning to run behind. But
Patrick right now at 55%.
He's running
Collier
about the same as of course, maybe a fewer number of votes. He's getting 2.5 to the 3.1 million.
Interesting.
But the margin's still the same. And then let's look at Paxton. Paxton the same.
54%.
He's running. He's getting. You know what's happening basically is the governor's getting more votes, but the margins are about the same. Now, just remember, this doesn't mean anything. This is what matters. And Paxton and the virtual Republican ticket will be reelected.
So again, let's take a big look at the state from a big picture view. Again, 55 to 44. But if you look back at 2018, the Senate race where O'Rourke did well, he did well on the border. And of course, he took Harris County. He also took Tarrant County. And that's a county we've been watching tonight. Again, This is the 2018 map.
I think what's important here is our map tells us who's winning and who's losing, a little darker by margins. But what's important here in 2018 is that this is where O'Rourke did extremely well. If you go to 2020, you'll see that, again, it's still where he's doing well. But when we get to canvas, I think what you're going to see is Republicans may not be winning these counties, but they're getting more votes. And you can draw congressional districts, you can't redraw counties.
And that's what we're seeing there.
And we're
still
seeing
these counties on the
basically
border leaning blue.
We're seeing if you can redraw congressional districts, you can bleed some voters from San Antonio down into the valley, you can win at least one of those 3 seats.
And if we have some time, let's take a look nationally at the balance of power and how things might be shifting in the U.S. Senate. We've been watching this race all night, the race in Georgia for Senate. Walker 49%, Warnock the incumbent 49%, very, very close in Georgia tonight.
And the significant number here is 2%. If this holds up through the night, there'll be a runoff in January. Neither Warnock nor Walker will win. I think the other one you want to look at and that would be a loss for the Democrats, but look at this race. Fetterman, with almost 60% of the vote, is holding on to a 4-point lead. That's a little bit of a surprise. I thought it'd be closer. I did think Fetterman would win, but that'll be a pickup for the Democrats.
Right.
So when we go to bed
and
tonight,
this was an open seat.
It's an open seat. It was held by,
in
but most importantly, it was held by a Republican.
Right.
And what you're going to see now is you're going to have to probably wait for Nevada. Ohio, which was really not a big toss-up, is clearly going to be no gain. The Republicans, it was an open seat, but the Republicans held it. So if you go to New Hampshire, for instance, where we thought that the incumbent Hassan would possibly be beaten, she's now running up a nice lead of 9 points on her opponent.
Yeah, that's been a comfortable lead in New Hampshire throughout the night we've seen.
So where if the Republicans are going to win tonight, are they going to do it? They're going to do it in Nevada, which we won't know until very late, and they'll probably have to also wait for Arizona, where of course Kelly is running against the Republican, and many think that's also a cliffhanger.
All right, and that is a look at the balance of power, 42 right now to 41 in the U.S. Senate. It's something we'll be watching throughout the night. We'll send it back to you.
All right, Grace White and Bob Stein, enlightening as always as we watch the balance of power in Washington. All right, and we have to tell you that we understand that the governor, Greg Abbott, who's down in the valley tonight in Harlingen, or McAllen, I'm sorry, at 10:02, he's expected to say something. So tune in for that. Stay with us. We'll see what happens at 10:02 as the governor comes out and talks to his supporters.
We're joined now by Marty Levy, a constitutional law professor at TSU, Orlando Sanchez, longtime Republican, held many jobs here with the city and the county, so very familiar face to us. Let's talk about some of these races. Let's talk about the governor's race. The lead here with Abbott, we're expecting him to speak at 10 o'clock. We're not calling anything, but we're expecting him to give some sort of victory speech. Are you surprised by the results? Is this what you were expecting?
Yeah, it's hard to be surprised. We were just discussing this in the KHOU's O'Rourke election. Beto took every major city, but in the rural area, KHOU's took 90%. In Texas, that's just very hard to overcome. And given that circumstance, that kind of would, I think, predicate the result here.
Orlando Sanchez, what do you think the governor's going to say at 10:02?
I think the governor is going to talk about the great shift in the Hispanic vote in Texas. As you know, Texas now has a majority, a plurality of Hispanic population. So, and we will be the majority in the future. The governor did predict that he would capture 50% of the Latino vote. I don't know that he gets there. But what we're watching for tonight, Ron, is to see how much the shift has occurred. Remember, Republicans don't need half of Latinos voting for them. Anything over about 34% ensures victory for Republicans in Texas if the Hispanics vote for Republicans. So anything above 34% is gravy.
I just want to tell you, we were just told by our producer, Nicole, that CBS News has just called that Greg Abbott has won the governor's race here in Texas. Something, as we were discussing just now, we were expecting. You made a really good point that I guess now, as the CBS News is reporting his victory, that he really did appeal to the Hispanic population in the Valley. He is in McAllen tonight. We understand that he is one of the only governors to ever visit the Valley as many times as he did. And clearly that has paid off for him tonight.
It has, and let me say that this started way back in 2016 when Donald Trump captured the imagination of Latinos. 2018 it got even better, and it's grown. But I think as Professor Levy correctly pointed out, and I think we discussed earlier, the growth in Texas isn't rural Texas. Counties are losing population. It's the urban areas. And the Republicans they've lost many urban counties in Texas. So the path for the future of the Republicans in Texas is going to be, how do you reverse the trends in urban counties?
Okay, so we're talking about the future of Texas, and apparently it's going to be Greg Abbott.
Yes.
Let's talk about the future of Beto O'Rourke. What can you tell us about that? What do you think lies ahead for him?
Well, that's just very hard to predict because he's had 2 defeats. And likely this one may not even be as close as KHOU's. So I think that's very, very hard to predict. It's conceivable because he's so popular in his home area that he does try to get a congressional seat at some point. But, I would say that's pretty hard to predict right now.
Maybe a cabinet position, perhaps, in the future for him. Who knows? Who knows? All right, we have Marcelina Benito with us now. Marcelina, what can you tell us?
Well, Ron, I can tell you CBS News has now called this race, projected this race for Governor Abbott. Governor Abbott has now defeated Beto O'Rourke. That is the call that just came in. Supporters actually heard several other networks before CBS about an hour ago call this race, so they've been celebrating for more than an hour. At 8 o'clock, we saw those results start coming in. Beto O'Rourke initially up, but then the tide quickly turned and that lead has only grown. I can tell you we expect Governor Abbott to take the stage here any minute now to address his supporters. We're told that time may be between 10 and 10:02. Governor Abbott is here at the property here in McAllen. He'll be celebrating in the Rio Grande Valley. 4 years ago, he celebrated his second re-election in Austin with his supporters. This year, a very poignant message he's trying to send by coming down to the Rio Grande Valley, the very place where he launched this campaign back in January. A fitting bookend now that he'll celebrate a victory with his supporters here in a matter of minutes. The campaign was optimistic the entire day, and there's been no surprise down here that the results have been what they have down here and across Texas. Ron?
All right, thank you so much. Marcelino Benito down in the valley. Again, the governor is expected to come out in just a few minutes at 10:02 precisely to what we assume will be his thank you speech.
Yeah, he mentioned
victory speech.
CBS News just called it. Other networks had mentioned it earlier and called it earlier. So he said Abbott's party, their campaign has been celebrating for probably about an hour now with this victory. We were talking about Beto O'Rourke. So much money and so much manpower has been put into his campaign. It seems it would be a shame to throw away a candidate that so much has been invested in. But like you said, very unclear as to what his path may be, considering just by how much he's lost in this election.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, very hard to predict. I think the real issue in Texas, and actually in terms of minorities, they are the majority in Texas. Okay, so it's very hard to predict the future when we haven't seen much happen in the past. But as Orlando was stating, I think in terms of growth of population, the Latino community is going to be the future of Texas. And the real issue there is people feeling comfortable to vote. Okay, a lot of those communities are very much afraid of voting. I remember talking to a Latino friend, and I said to her, well, you're going to vote for Obama. She said, I don't know if I could ever vote again. She said, my experience at the polls was so frightening and so intimidating, I'm afraid to go back. And we were talking about this early. Those are issues in America. We have our history is not people voting. Our history is suppressing the vote.
Well, how about the whole issue of underserved communities feeling like their vote doesn't count?
Yes.
There's that issue as well.
Yes.
To that point, I want to talk about the Hispanic vote. They are really mobilizing and getting to the polls, as we are seeing in this election. We talked earlier about how all Hispanics don't vote the same. We can't always assume they're Democrats or Republicans. But again, in the Valley, we are seeing those seats change. We are seeing, Democratic strongholds turn red now. What is most appealing to Hispanic voters in this election? What are the issues that are the priorities?
Well, as you know, I run an organization called Texas Latino Conservatives, and we did a historic poll of 1,200 registered Hispanic voters only. We wanted to know where they were, what were their issues, and where we should deploy our limited dollars in this campaign. Hispanics were bothered by 61% by the Democrats and what they're talking about. Hispanics are worried about the economy. They're worried about jobs, economic opportunity, a bright future. I think the stopping, the curtailing of the Keystone Pipeline absolutely terrorized Hispanics who were making a great living in the energy business. You saw that in Starr County and in the areas of Texas that are replete with oil. Those jobs came to a screeching halt because this administration is bent on the Green New Deal, which will eliminate those good-paying jobs. So Hispanics want what every American wants: security, economic opportunity, good education for their children, and for God's sake, security in their neighborhood.
Yeah, well, the Hispanics who are Democrats want what the Democrats want, and Hispanics who are Republican want what Republicans want. We have Gerald Harris now with the Beto O'Rourke campaign in El Paso. Gerald.
Hey, Ron, we're expecting Beto O'Rourke to make an appearance here very soon to talk with his supporters. As we reported, CBS has projected that Governor Greg Abbott will win a third term. A rare feat for a governor here in Texas, but it's important to note that the O'Rourke campaign ran a race that they thought was solid. They went into multiple areas. The numbers aren't there for him. He needed young voters to turn out. He needed Latino voters to vote for him. In a voting bloc that we haven't spent a whole lot of time talking about, Black voters in Texas needed to show up and show up strongly. He's underperforming his 2018 run, and there are areas where he expected more but did not get it, and we see the results here with Governor Greg Abbott winning a third term. For him, what's next? We don't know that yet, but we're expecting to hear from him. This is his third time running for major office, if you will. He's a former West Texas congressman in the El Paso area, ran for Senate, lost to Ted Cruz, ran for president, didn't get out the primary, and now losing the governor's race. So things are going to get somber here really quickly with Beto O'Rourke coming out soon to concede the race to Governor Greg Abbott. Ron?
All right, thank you so much, Gerald Harris, live in El Paso with the Beto O'Rourke campaign. They're not going to be happy tonight.
No.
But again, what's happening with the governor being declared the winner, the incumbent being declared the winner, is no surprise to anyone.
No, and Greg Abbott is expected to speak right around 10 o'clock, 10:02 specifically, we were told. But you saw Gerald Harris at Beto O'Rourke's campaign headquarters in El Paso. O'Rourke did basically broke fundraising records against Abbott. It was quite the race. I know that a lot of people were still expecting Greg Abbott to win, but very much thinking that Beto O'Rourke was quite the contender. He really played on voters who were concerned about Roe versus Wade being overturned, about the Uvalde school shooting and issues with school safety. So certainly put up a good fight against an incredibly popular governor.
Yeah, the Texas power grid was another issue as well.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, the Beto O'Rourke's future, uncertain at this point. But let's talk about the governor's future. What do we have ahead of us? Is it going to be, are we going to see changes from the governor? Are we going to see the continued fight with the Biden administration? What do you see coming forward from the governor's mansion?
I mean, I think you're going to see the governor fighting for Texans. For decades, and you guys know this, you've covered it, Texans have been funding the cost of the waves of humanity coming across the border. As I said earlier, every social service, every county jail, every sheriff, every constable, every police officer, every school is paid for with property taxes in this state. And it's Texans that are supplying the funds for undocumented aliens to the detriment of their own families and children. And Texans are fed up. And so I think that Governor Abbott is going to continue to fight Washington to get the resources down here to once and for all get this border under control. It's literally killing us.
Professor, what do you see as the future for Texas under Abbott under another term?
I many years ago was fortunate to work for Bobby Kennedy, did advanced work and wrote speeches for him. And he said this to me, and I don't know if it was his thought or he got it from somewhere else, but it's a piercing thought for politicians, and it sure is labeled a Greg Abbott. He said, Marty, always ask a politician over what issues they're willing to lose. And he's probably a pretty damn good politician, because I think that's his concentration. And I think it's caused great harm. I think you can make an argument, for example, that when he withdrew Medicare funding, Medicaid funding, a lot of it for elderly, withdrew their health care, claiming it cost when the federal government was paying for almost all of it, 90%. When you do that with intent, you're going to kill elderly people.
And that was just pure politics?
I think that was done for political ideology.
Orlando, what do you think?
Texas was a republic in 1836 before during the Battle of San Jacinto. Texans are fiercely independent. By allowing the federal government in and dictating what the Texas medical system was going to look like, the Republicans said, we're not standing for it. We like the money, but it's like highway funds.
And I'm so sorry to cut you off. We are going to have to wrap up our online political show. We thank you so much for joining us. Len Cannon, Mia Granny, taking over at 10 o'clock on KHOU 11 News, and we'll be covering these elections all night long. Good night.
Don't go anywhere.